Hunger Games Year 64. Honey, are you ready yet? Clove's mother called from the bottom of the staircase. Adjusting the weight of her elder daughter's messenger bag on her shoulder, she called yet again, Clove. It takes 10 minutes to get to the annex. It's rude to be late, especially on your first day. I can't find anything to wear, came the delayed response from the top of the stairs. Mrs. Holloway sighed, lifting the messenger bag off of her shoulder, and grabbing her younger daughter from her place on their living room couch. Racing up the stairs, she swiftly pushed her eldest daughter's door open to find a seemingly war-torn bedroom. Sitting in a growing pile of clothing was 6-year-old Clove. Clove's mother didn't bother to mention to her distraught daughter that most of these items were not suitable for training in the first place, including a white dress that Clove had accidentally ruined at a classmate's birthday the previous school year and spotted pajamas that were too small. Elmer Holloway set her younger daughter on the floor and impatiently rummaged through a drawer in Clove's dresser, quickly withdrawing a black tank top and lime green pair of spandex shorts. Her long hair toppled over her left shoulder as she leaned into the drawer and she shook her head to clear the hair from her line of sight. When you're done putting on your outfit, don't forget to put on socks and double knot your shoelaces. You have 2 minutes, Clove, or your father will hear about this. Clove stuck her lip out in a pout. As Clove began to put on the tank top, Mrs. Holloway nodded affirmatively and returned downstairs to her last-minute errands. She eyed Clove's messenger bag critically and added 2 more juice boxes and an extra bag of her trail mix for good measure. Finally satisfied, she entered the vehicle garage, placing Clove's messenger bag in the back seat of her car. In the background, she could hear Clove trailing down the stairs with loud thumps. She placed her youngest daughter in her car seat, fastened her in, and then returned to the driver's seat. Clove appeared, pacing nervously in the garage. Mrs. Holloway couldn't help but to smile at her daughter's reluctance. You look great. Come on, let's get going. As they drove towards the annex, all fronts were quiet. Clove gazed curiously out the window as they took the dirt road north towards the center of town. Eventually, they made a left turn and she saw a field of green, a field so unlike where they lived. It was an 8-minute commute. When they came to complete stop, Clove gazed upward to the multi-storied industrial building. This was it. This was the training annex of District 2 West. It was a sight. She scratched a few fingers against the tightened hair tie and looked on nervously. Her mother's words cut her ruminations short. We'll be back in the afternoon. Do well. Clove pried the door open and inched out cautiously. She dragged her messenger bag from the seat and pulled it against herself. Then, she took a breath and ran into the building, waving off at her mother. Her mother watched her enter the building, and called out from her car window, Clove, make us, before pursing her lips together. Her little girl had already vanished from sight. Underscore 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 underscore. As Clove traveled inside the building, she noticed just how far outwards the building stretched. The initial adrenaline wore off, creating a dull tension in her shoulders that made her wince. She dropped the blue messenger bag onto the floor and began to pull it along rather haphazardly, looking for any help she could find. That's when she came upon a woman sitting behind a counter. Clove stood on the tips of her toes and asked, "Mrs., where is the room where we put our backpacks?" The older woman looked away from her screen and down over the counter at her. She pointed hazily to the left. "You have about 3 minutes until class begins, so you'd better hurry, child." Clove frowned slightly. "Thanks, Mrs." She rolled her shoulders, sighed, and began running towards the entrance of the locker rooms. As she traipsed along, her messenger bag began making unfriendly clinks as it dragged along the tile in hasty bumps. Inside the girls' locker room was humid, brightly lit, and a bit dingy. The lockers towered high above her, with many already enclosed. Clove paced slowly, pulling a door open to place her bag. Forcefully, she shoved the blue messenger back into place, and slammed the door with as much strength as she could muster. Stumbling out the door, she sprinted down the hallway in search of her classroom. She counted the class numbers in the distance, toppling over suddenly when she was hit by something strong. It took her less than a second to recover, shouting an apology to the blonde blur that fell behind her as she continued to her classroom. Her eyes caught the sign signifying she had found the right room. A grey placard adorned the wall, written in black ink, announcing registered youth, level I. Twisting the door handle, Clove entered. The first thing she noticed was the absence of any adult figure, the second was the comfortable mat floors. She recognized some of the girls from school, but that was less than half of the girls in the room. Sitting a safe distance from them, Clove eyed the door with anticipatory anxiety. Less than a minute later that the door opened and the rest of the girls behind her pivoted towards their new companion. Their instructors took no time to command them into a single file line. As the pair perused the girls, they made quick observations of each girl, some neutral, most quite critical. By the time they reached her, their observations were brief and she was tallied up in 3 adjectives: she's rather small, a delicate and unrefined girl. I'm not sure how she'll fare. They then moved on to the next girl, a girl in pigtails and red tea, whose lip quavered as they labeled her uncoordinated and various other mean remarks. Her breathing was shallow, her hands winding and unwinding into fists as she bit her lip. "Stop it!" Clove whispered to the girl. The pigtailed girl's response was an angry glare, crossing her arms sullenly. Clove only dismissed her tantrum and watched as the instructors continued their assessments of the other girls. Their first-year orientation began shortly after, in which the instructors assigned them positions on the mats. "Holloway, your second row, first on the left." She took her place and was gifted a 1-inch circular red pin. It read Cohort 64, Level I, with her surname in smaller print below it. This pin must be worn at all times. Failure to present your pin upon request will result in punishment. Are we understood? Yes, the girls chorused together. Those of you in this group have been assigned to Class 1C. There are 5 first-year classes, 3 boys' classes and 2 girls. You will be kept separate from the boys for the first 3 years of introductory training until you're promoted to intermediate level, when you begin weapons training. At the end of your 3rd year, a skills test will be required for those of you hoping to move on to the next set of courses. The older of the instructors spoke next. You have been assigned to the year 64 cohort because each of you is 6 years old today. For some of you that is better luck than others. Think to yourself which of you leans closer to 7 years old than 6 and determine what advantages or disadvantages it may bring. Clove figured that she didn't swing either way in the pendulum of luck based on her birth date, which was more or less in the middle. She watched as the younger instructor became more ardent, passionately remarking, "One of our district's most recent victors, Inoberia Jamison, won only 2 years ago and she trained here. Imagine, if an education here benefited Miss Jamison, think of what it could do for you. If you are talented enough, clever enough, strong enough, it may be one of you who has the great honor of going on to represent our district in a Hunger Games of your very own someday." The orientation then closed with an order to run the perimeter of the room 10 times, and in that moment, Clove swore the room grew infinitely larger. In the first few laps, the girls mostly held their pace, but eventually the girls began to stagger. Almost instantaneously, the instructors swooped in like hawk to their prey. They harped nastily at the girls. Clove hardly kept her pace, but it took a solid half-hour for the laps to cease. She certainly wasn't the fastest in her class, but unlike the sobbing girls in the corner, she wasn't the slowest either. Unsympathetically, they screeched at the gaggle of crying girls that they had a choice between returning to their places or leaving and never returning. Hastily, the girls returned to their spots and watched through blurred eyes as their instructors demonstrated elementary sparring techniques, mostly punching and defensive blocks. After 3 demonstrations, the girls were split into 2 lines and paired up. Clove's side was instructed to punch, while the opposing side was to defend. Clove sunk into herself with self-pity upon being paired up with the nervous girl from before. Once in the proper stance, the command came for them to begin, and Clove began punching. They repeated the same motion of punching and defending until they were nearly against the wall. Somewhat adjusted to the motion, Clove moved forward once last time and struck the girl. Her partner fell to the ground with a bouncing thud against the mats. Immediately, Clove stepped forward and outstretched her arm to her partner. "I sorta cheated," she admitted. "You are not to deviate from the technique." The younger of the instructors was upon them in an instant. "What is your name?" Out of breath, Clove replied, Clove Holloway. You were told not to deviate from the technique, were you not? Clove bit her lip. Yes. 10 extra laps, Holloway. Make sure you're not in the business of making this mistake again. Are we understood? Yes, M. The instructor then turned towards her partner and violently yanked her by a pigtail. And you? I really am sorry. She winced at the instructor's warm breath. You are dismissed, Miss Winthrop, the older instructor said, appearing much calmer than his colleague. The girl's eyes began to water, but with a quick gesture for the door, she ran outside of the room. Where are those laps, Holloway? The instructor grit out. Trembling, Clove began her laps around the gym, determined not to stop in fear of retaliation. Underscore 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 underscore. After several hours their class was dismissed for a short break. Feeling her energy in a peculiar sort of flux, Clove nearly skipped her way towards the girls' locker room. Along the way, she managed to soak her tank top when a mishap with the drinking fountain left her dripping. Walking along the path to the girls' locker room, she thought wistfully of all the things she could have been doing besides training. Her kindergarten teacher had told her she'd be a great candidate for 2 West one day, and her teacher had promised to never lie to them. Towing the edge of an underpass, Clove began to watch the various groups of older students making their way through the annex. Some groups of friends began to challenge each other to various physical challenges, while others discussed what workshops they'd take in their free hours. It was another minute along the way that she noticed a younger blonde boy closer to her age leaning against the wall of the victor's hallway. He didn't look like he wanted to be bothered. Clove understood the feeling. He was poring over a bag of trail mix and she glanced over him enviously, suddenly excited for her own bag. It was then she noticed the teal ribbons laying wastefully on the floor beside him. Her eyes tightened in response and she made her way over to him. "Hello," she said brightly. The blonde boy looked up, as if unsure she was talking to him or not. When he ascertained that she was, he watched her suspiciously. "What do you want?" When she didn't reply right away, he turned away, eating another handful of the trail mix. Clove begged her mind to come up with something more to say. Instead, the boy broke the ice with a snide remark, "Nice shirt, newbie." Clove took a seat beside him. His glance over in response made it abundantly clear he hadn't welcomed this move. She chose to ignore his disdain, sitting next to him in silence. There was no tactful way to broach this topic. How did she start? "Hey, what were you doing in the girls' locker room?" Or "Hey, you stealer, why did you take my trail mix?" Or "Hey, that's mine, dummy." Clove supposed she could let it slide, but she was still so curious as to why he'd stolen the trail mix from her messenger bag. She hesitated, softly grabbing the familiar ribbons, her mother's signature ribbons, and clenching them in her hand. Finally, she smiled at him, deciding what to say, and he looked back at her just as suspicious as before. "I can bring you more trail mix tomorrow." The boy looked up, a ghost of a flush on his face. He scowled at her as if to be threatening, but when that didn't appear to work he let out a sigh a moment later. He rose and looked down on her now, remarking, "Fair enough. I'm Cato Elroy. I'm in cohort 63. From this new angle he seemed much less intimidating. "See you around, new kid," he said, mockingly waving as he stalked off. Cato pulled off the weighted vest and threw it into a pile with a few others. He was the last to leave, watching his peers exit in many a manner, some stretching out their backs, others quenching themselves with their water canisters. His vest made a nasty clunking sound on immediate impact and he gave it a dirty look before leaving the room himself. As he made his way down the hallways, he heard the wails of a new year. Cato couldn't be sure, but he believed it likely the first-year girls. He spied through a window, none of the girls were bleeding. Not yet, anyways. He wondered if they would wail less if they knew how much worse it was for first-year boys. There was something to be said for how well the annex broke in its boys, he thought. Pulling himself from the door, he continued down his path. He went into his pocket, only managing to pluck a single quarter. He heard his father's comments in the back of his mind right as his stomach protested, Food may become scarce in the arena, boy. You must be able to survive without it if you want to ensure your success. Kato grew frustrated. He wasn't sure how that made sense when he'd seen in the most recent games that the tributes of District 2 had the most bountiful sponsors. While that hadn't been enough to save them, he couldn't determine why this method was the one his parents had chosen. A group of students from a much older cohort were walking along the path in the opposite direction of him, with a few snickering at his appearance. "They get mangier and mangier every year," he heard one say. Kato stomped away angrily in response and made his way to the girls' locker room. Not a soul was in sight to his great fortune. He began to rummage through his pick of a few lockers' selections. Many of the bags were littered with largely useless items, such as sunblock, towels, and toys. He shoved those bags back into their lockers with a nasty kick. Right as he was about to give up on his search, he tripped over a bag spilling out from a floor-level locker. The messenger bag reminded him of his own brother's bag, though this one was blue instead of black. He sorted through the bag to find juice boxes, socks, and personal effects. His curiosity piquing, he snatched up a note in the corner of the bag. "Clove, darling, work your hardest. We know you'll continue to make us proud. Love, Mama, Papa, and Magnilda." Kato stuffed the note back into the bag with a sour huff until he came upon a few bags of trail mix hidden underneath a spare pair of shoes. Now, this would do. Doing this Clove girl a favor for her generosity, he closed her bag and made sure this time it fit properly into the locker before making his way. Underscore 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 underscore. As he sat in the decorated victor's hallway of the annex with his prize in tow, Kato looked to the portraits he'd passed so many times the previous year. The portraits were hung in succession from left to right, so furthest right hung a photo of their newest victor, Wyatt Armour. Last year, at age 18, he'd done a number on the last tributes, powerfully wielding a gleaming silver sword. "The Armour boy is on television again," his father had remarked one morning not too long ago. "He certainly does a number of interviews. Someone has to, since Carroll and Valajo can't be asked to," his mother had retorted, spitefully. "Jamison was on the other day, too. Holland does a good job of wrangling his keep." There were tales and then tall tales among them of the victors of two past. Their most infamous was the victor of Hunger Games 52, Dre Holland, a dark-skinned tribute, had carved open the stomach of the District 10 male tribute and had used his intestines to strangle the female tribute from District 1. Not all of their victors were as reputable. 2 years back-to-back they'd had some rather low-key victors. Minor Carroll had won in 58. She, and the Grim Reaper victor, Raoul Valajo of 59, whom she had befriended, had slipped into the shadows post-victory, only reappearing as required. When their instructors wanted to motivate them, they'd often recite, "In Oberia Jamison trained here. If an education here benefited her, imagine the doors it can open for you." No one ever mentioned Minor Carroll had trained here, too. Kato didn't believe that to be an accident. "There are whispers they'll marry," his brother had told him once of the pair. They'd be the first to do so. The portraits that hung predated their games, a motivational instrument to remind the students that they too could achieve the highest glory. Still, it was peculiar to him how normal they looked. Minor had dimples and wild blonde hair she couldn't tame. Inoberia had a small scratch on the tip of her nose that he'd never really looked for before in her interviews. Dre had crooked teeth and scar running down his neck. In these photos Kato thought to himself that he wouldn't be surprised to watch some of them stalking down this very hallway. He found a steady seat looking to Brutus Headshot, who then had light brown hair. Kato opened the cellophane bag. He discarded the teal ribbon on the floor and looked into the bag, where he found raisins, peanuts, almonds, granola, and even small color-coded pieces of chocolate. A perfect treat. Well, almost. The almonds were a crime against humanity, but he figured he would be forgiving this one time. Brutus was easily the best, he thought. The strongest, most certainly, and from the appearances he made on television, easily the funniest, too. Not even a minute into the treat, he heard the exhausted sighs from the dreary and worn-down first-year girls. Many looked ready to go home to their mothers and never return. He wondered if Clove was one of those girls before putting them out of his mind. Really, there were more important matters to attend to. If he could make it through the next 3 hours, just 3 more hours, things would take an upturn. He pulled a knee inwards and slumped lazily against it, yawning slightly. "Hello," he heard suddenly in front of him. With a frown on his face, he looked upwards. A girl unfamiliar to him, presumably a level I, was watching him curiously. Her dark hair was fluffy from exposure to sweat and she had drenched her black top. "What do you want?" She wasn't crying, which made her miles better than some of the other first years, but that assumption was met with a lingering not crying yet. Unintimidated, she sat beside him and remained silently. Whatever, he figured, and returned to his trail mix. When it became clear that a silence tactic wouldn't discourage her, he added with a sneer, "Nice shirt, newbie." The little girl bit her lip with aggravation, succeeding only in stretching her top. The continuing theme of silence persisted, but didn't bother him much. Kato returned to his mantra. 3 more hours, 3 more hours. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted the girl grabbing the teal ribbons from the tile. Maybe that was all she wanted. Girls enjoyed those sorts of things, right? She smiled at him. "I can bring you more trail mix tomorrow." So this was Clove. He went cold for a moment. She wasn't going to tell on him, was she? In hopes she'd keep quiet, Kato gave her his nastiest scowl. Clove remained undaunted. Sighing, he picked himself up. He figured she was probably harmless. Well, at least for now, and that's all he could do before he was late. She seemed particularly cheerful, which was disarming. Kato almost felt pity. "Fair enough. I'm Kato Elroy. I'm in cohort 63." The 3-hour mantra continued in his head, and with a hazy wave, he teased, "See you around, new kid." And suddenly, he felt a lot better already. Underscore 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 underscore. The showcases were one of his favorite annex activities. To watch and admire older students' skill sets and to develop an understanding of what would come to be expected of them was an opportunity not to be missed. Mars, his older brother, was a part of the initial performance. Confidence was key. Kato could see that. Mars gracefully threw one axe to the left, hitting the training dummy directly in the heart, and then did the same with his right hand. Looking slightly superfluous, he gave the audience a cocky grin. 2 boys behind him stepped forward and 2 even older girls set up a new display. As if to test their limits, the 2 girls set up a challenge and elder boys each bestowed the performers with a sword, an expectant twinkle in their eyes. Each of the challengers was then handed a sword by the elder boys, who gave an expectant look to the performers. Mars stepped down and the new boys took his place. Skill and precision are critical to a good tribute, but do not sacrifice technique for a win. The Hunger Games is just as much about artistry and technique as they are about cunning, survival, and bravery. Our district rarely falls short of a good show, and it would be a dishonor to begin now, the annex administrator introduced. "Look, look," a boy murmured to another in an excited whisper. Kato turned, grated, before watching the boy be dragged aside by an instructor. With a sense of wonder, he waited for them to return, and when they did, the first year was clutching his cheek, devoid of commentary. It was then that a sudden weight fell into his lap. He turned back around to see the brunette from before, watching with intrigue as 2 students sparred, a red-haired teen kneeing his opponent in the stomach. When it was clear that he'd won, the instructors dismissed the audience, and Clove looked to him. Kato grabbed the rather large bag of trail mix, looking for his older brother, but unable to find him. "I told you I'd get more," she said, smirking as they walked towards the exit among loud, excited chatter. "Well." He wanted to pick his words carefully. "Thanks, I guess." "Don't," she said, turning to him with a vindictive flair that took him by surprise. "The next time you steal my mama's trail mix, I'll get you." Kato quirked his head to the side. Finally deciding on laughter as the best approach, he remarked, "I'll hold you to that, newbie." That's when he saw her spark and the possibility. "Clove. My name is Clove, she huffed in frustration. It's only the first day and you're already mad. Don't you know you got a long way to go, he teased. Clove scrunched up her nose and ammoed up a hasty response, before retreating to a figure in the distance. Don't count me out yet, Cato Elroy. Cato laughed again and taunted, wouldn't dream of it. October, Hunger Games Year 66. It became routine. 8-year-old Clove Holloway would sneak into the boys' locker room, deposit the large bag of trail mix in his locker, and vanish into the day. This time, though, Clove had attached a hole-punched note to the familiar teal ribbons encapsulating the cellophane bag. Clove glimpsed over the note doubtfully and made her decision, tearing it away, and holding it in the palm of her hand. It wasn't worth the trouble, she decided. What you looking at? His familiar voice inquired as he steadied over with a white towelette in his hand. Cato wiped his face and exhaled a relieved sigh. Clove didn't respond, prompting him to snatch the note from her with presumptuous roll of his shoulder. Cato, she protested unhappily, but that didn't deter him from uncrumpling the note and glimpsing over it. Good luck today, it read in total chicken scratch. Thanks, Clovey, he said, with an arrogant, yet sincere smile spread across his cheeks. Cato pocketed the scrap with a widening grin when he saw what lied behind her. More trail mix. You're the best. Cato sat on the bench adjacent from his locker, taking a handful into his mouth. He gestured for her to sit beside him since his mouth was too full to speak. Clove huffed, mildly exasperated, what would you do without me? She began playing with the fraying ends of her ponytail. Probably, starve, he answered between mouthfuls. Clove dismissed the theatrics as just another piece of the Elroy puzzle. His boyish smile and innocent disposition were increasingly hard to come by, but she figured moments like this made her shaky alliance with him worth the extra effort. Chocolate's the best part, he told her. Clove was impressed with how long he'd maintained his civility. She wondered what his comrades would say if they could see him now. She stirred in her seat. Are you nervous about exams? Clove lifted her messenger bag on the seat and its weight rung against the metal. She withdrew a bag of apple slices and nibbled on the first slice slowly. No, but it looks like you are. Cato rested a sympathetic hand on her shoulder. He watched her expression reform into confusion and he retracted his hand. You did it last year, Clove, you can do it this year, and when you pass, you'll finally get to work with real weapons. I know that, she griped defensively. You sure never stop talking about that stupid sword of yours. Swords aren't stupid, he replied, instantly shifting his posture more aggressively. They are if you can't get close enough to your challenger to attack. That would never happen. Cato barked. He simmered for a moment, before shoving her violently away from him. His eyes widened when she fell so far back that the back of her head made quick contact with silver bleacher. Clove bounced back, holding her head with a look that could kill. Cato looked unsure of himself and only asked, why do you always have to be so mean, Clove? Heat flushed her face. Me? I'm not the mean one, Cato, she snapped, hitting him back just as hard in the stomach. Cato faltered and she didn't miss his wince of pain. That quelled her anger for a moment and she said to him, weapons training probably isn't that fun if they hit you in the stomach. Without an ounce of reluctance, Clove lifted his shirt to examine the wound she'd inflicted. I don't. She murmured to herself, examining his injury. There was no slicing, no bleeding wound, not a bandage she could see. In its place was a doozy of a bruise with many smaller marks surrounding the injury. That couldn't alone be her doing. These don't look they come from any weapon here. Are you cross-training, too? That would explain why you're such a jerk all the time. No, he said, frowning. There was a soft brush of her fingers across the sorest part of his abdomen. Hey, stop it. Cato commanded, pushing her away from him. This time he was considerably more aware of how hard he was pushing her and withdrew. This only sparked Clove's interest even more. He looked worried and for some reason that worry spurred even more of her concerns. Who did this to you, Cato? Who cares, he responded, irate. Cato pulled a water canister from his locker and turned away from Clove. Who did this? Clove emphasized each word, drawing them out, and pulled at the circular collar of his red t-shirt. Kato tilted his head to the side and allowed wariness to take over. At 40 feet tall and barely 50 pounds, she was hardly a contender against him, but that didn't mean she wasn't a threat. Resigned, Kato replied softly, "Take a guess." "Your family," she asked, her face full of sorrow. "But why?" "To make me stronger," he said, defensively. He wiped at his eyes self-consciously. "We have to tell someone," Clove exclaimed, abandoning her snacks, and gunning for the exit of the boys' locker room. Kato quickly snatched her right wrist and forcefully yanked her away from the door. "Do you really think that will help?" he asked her, angry. "Don't even think about it. I'm serious. If you even dare, I'll make sure this is the last time you ever come in the annex ever again." Clove struggled against him. "It's not fair." To her credit, she didn't cry. To her credit, she tried to stand her ground, but there was just too much at stake. This indiscretion would forever cause a shift in their allyship. They would never be able to go back to casual friendship ever again, not with his secret hanging in open air. Training hurts enough, and now there. He turned around and forced her to look into his eyes. "Listen to me. It doesn't matter." Clove continued to struggle against him, eventually slamming her elbow into the apex of his nose. "Ah, Clove," he complained, releasing her from his clutches and trying to stop the bleeding. "I won't let them do that to you," she said, earnestly. Clove handed him his white towelette, which he snatched forcefully from her hand with a glare. "Listen, you think what they do to me is bad? Well, what I'll do to your family will be way worse if you don't keep your mouth shut," Kato said, coolly. Clove scowled, defiant, and resolutely unafraid of his threats. "I'm just trying to get your family killed, shrimp. I'm serious. Don't even think about it." Clove inhaled an angry breath, balled her fist, and knocked him down with as much strength she could muster. He crumpled slightly, with a much more noticeable wince than before, and she looked down on him with a hostile expression, the fury unwinding before him. "You're a lot dumber than I thought, Kato Elroy." February, Hunger Games Year 67. Kato supposed it was likely all coincidence, but his friends had a strange, sickening fascination with Clove. Of all the potential victims to torture, she was certainly their favorite, and especially their favorite to drag him along with. If their antagonism of Clove had been genuine and rooted from a place of sincere disdain, he could at least pretend to understand their frame of mind. As it stood, they appeared to rather like her in some aspects. They were always the loudest voices to cheer her on during hand-to-hand combat demonstrations. Too bad they were always fighting a losing battle, because Clove was pretty much beyond hope as far that pursuit went. So, as they entered the close combat training room, Kato hung back. He was lucky that Felix, the oldest of them, was just tall enough to hide him by a few inches. "Holloway," Felix said, exaggerating with a slick grin as he made his way over to the punching bag Clove was desperately assaulting. "What do you want, hoodlum?" she grit impatiently in between punches. "Felix, Holloway." "Felix. The ladies call me Felicity," he corrected, his Cheshire grin still in place. "No, they don't," another of his friends said from behind him. Clove didn't outright say she didn't care, but that much was apparent to the collective. She returned to the punching bag, this time working on her kicks and placing a great deal of effort to dodge the bag's momentum as it swung back around. It only took a few kicks for her to take pause, panting, then she leaned on the bag for a moment when it came to a halt. "You should practice with us, Clove." "Yeah, but you guys are bigger than me, Nero. It's not really a fair fight," Clove said, returning to the punching bag with even more vigor. She managed to get one punch in that particularly impressed him, but consequently the rest were more disappointing than the previous round. Nero rolled his shoulders in response. "Can't say I didn't offer." "That's not what I asked for, though, Nero," she said, sullenly. Kato couldn't be sure what she meant by that, but ultimately it was her choice whether to accept their aid or not, even to the detriment of her training. Kato didn't voice the thought that most of the students in the annex were bigger than her and that the Hunger Games were certainly not going to be a fair fight. Nero only huffed in response, crossing his arms. "Kato's the smallest. He'll fight you." "Hey. Don't volunteer me for stuff, Dicey." Kato snapped instantly in surprise, turning back to the brown-eyed boy behind him. Dicey had offered that quickly, much too quickly, gunning for blood. Dicey grumbled a few expletives that seemed to surprise even Felix, whose bright brown eyes had widened in confusion. Nero pulled Dicey an arm's length away from Clove. In response, the auburn-haired boy gave Nero a glare. Felix's slick grin continued, and in Cato's opinion, he was enjoying this entirely too much. As if to diffuse, Felix stalked even closer to her. "Hey, Holloway, when's your birthday?" In a simple blow, Felix gave the punching bag much more strength than Clove had been able to muster thus far. February 48 she managed, while dodging Felix's rebounding bag. She went in for another punch, still engaging at the bare minimum. "Cato and Dicey are 9 too, then." Thoughtfully, he added, "Cato won't be 10 until the summer, you know." Clove directed the punching bag back towards Felix, who casually thrust it towards her. They took turns with one another. Cato noticed Clove's posture slacken, if only just a bit. "Yeah, I know. Finicadae won on the same day as Cato's birthday. We saw his brother in the bakery. It's the 27th of June, right? My sister's birthday is the 2nd of July. Dicey and Felix appeared mildly surprised, with Nero supplementing, "That's the most you've said to us in a while, Clove." Clove shrugged, still not giving him the time of day, and then returned to kicking the punching bag. "Talking's easy, but talking's a choice." "So, you choose not to talk to us?" Felix asked. "I choose not to talk to him," she corrected, her comment directed spitefully toward Nero. The three boys turned to Nero curiously, but said nothing. Cato couldn't help but cringe at her technique. The instructors always ran them ragged, but maybe girls got a free pass. Cato wrinkled his nose for a moment and motioned himself closer to Felix and farther from Dicey and Nero. "Why are you in the hand-to-hand combat classroom, anyways?" "My third quarter examination is over hand-to-hand, and I plan to win." Dicey traipsed forward, an unbecoming smirk as he freed himself from Nero's clutches. "Not if you keep training like this, Runt," he said, haughty and hysterical. "How do you live with yourself knowing that you're this far in and still this bad?" "Dicey, leave it alone," Nero admonished. "No, really," Dicey continued arrogantly. "Cato's smallest, but if he won't do it, I will. I'm right about the same size, eh, Felix?" "Right about," Felix agreed. "I don't want to," Clove said, turning away from him. "Then you're never going to improve." "Never. You have to be able to take on any challenge if you really want to get better." Clove growled, but Dicey only invited it in. "I mean, really, Runt, this is pathetic. Maybe we should start taking bets for when you get cut," and Clove tackled Dicey to ground and viciously knocked his head against the mats. The three boys took a step back to avoid becoming a casualty in the scene that was unfolding right before their eyes. Once they did, each came to some rather dry conclusions about the fight. Nero was shamefully trying to cover his mouth and hide his laughter, Felix looked ecstatic, and even Cato couldn't help the lopsided grin on his face as Clove hit Dicey in the jaw. "Stop calling me a runt," she squealed. Dicey didn't stay down for long and regained the upper hand, punching Clove in stomach. She flailed her arms hysterically in response and succeeding in hitting him on the back of the head with a great deal of force. He let her go for a brief second, before pinning her down with his elbow. "You won't win, Holloway." He released his elbow, and when she rose up, Dicey grabbed her by the ponytail instead and pulled her towards him. "Try harder. This isn't a picnic. Come on." Cato and Nero squinted their eyes. Felix finally lost his cocky grin, looking rather confused at the whole display. Was Dicey coaching her? Why? Felix scratched his head and pressed his black hair back, before settling on resting his arm on Cato's shoulder, using him as support. "This is weird," he said, watching the duo. "No kidding," Cato replied. "Wilder, let me go." Clove screeched. Dicey's fist collided with her teeth, resulting in a sickening mix of blood and saliva. Clove used this opportunity to lean her head forward and slam her forehead into him. Dicey released her ponytail upon impact and Clove hastily grabbed his neck. Instantly, she pressed her fingers against his throat and he collapsed. Maybe she was learning something after all, Cato thought. Clove panted, desperately trying to catch her breath, while also coughing out blood. Nero stood reluctantly, as if trying to decide whether to come to her aid. "Not bad," Holloway Felix said, back to his Cheshire grin. He went to shake her hand, but she gave him a strange look and left them to their thoughts with a haughty glare. Once he broke out his stupor, Nero fell to the floor beside Dicey, and gently lifted the unconscious boy onto himself. "You should know better than that by now," he murmured to Dicey. Still irate from Dicey's misbehavior, Cato castigated, "Stop babying him. He forced Felix off of himself, and you started this. Stop." Nero gave him a scowl that reminded him a great deal of Clove. "I have to make sure he's breathing. Maybe if you paid attention to more than just weapons, you'd know that some injuries can't wait to be treated, Cato." "Like I care. Whatever. I'm going to watch the displays. When Dicey stops being a wimp, come find me. Underscore 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 underscore. Watching Clove get into a zen state of synchrony was fascinating. He always pictured her as sharp-tongued and defensive, never this calm. The room was loud at this point, with many of the level I and IIS sitting nervously. Some of the girls huddled together, holding hands protectively. A small group of students came in, but the classroom never surpassed 35 students. It would be a quiet display, much more dignified for Clove. Cato wondered if Clove still despised him. They hadn't had a full conversation in months, and any time it seemed they would, she'd bolt. What made everything even more bleak was that bags of trail mix kept on coming. Still, things weren't the same. There were no more notes, no more ribbons adorning the transparent bags, just a black twist. That first bag after their falling out had left in a state of grave hesitation. He'd wondered if she'd poisoned the mix in retaliation, and that had staved him off for a few extra days until he inevitably caved. When a few more days had passed and he realized it hadn't been tainted, that only had fed the weight in his chest. Now, as Cato watched Clove make her way to the center of the room to begin the demonstration, he could only wonder if she'd be able to replicate her match against Dicey. Her sparring partner was a boy from her age cohort who was even taller than he was. He was also moderately muscular, but no more than most Clove's age. As the demonstration commenced, Clove's instructors introduced them both. "On our left is Clove Holloway, a third grader and level 3. To our right is Leon Owens, a fourth grader, also a level 3. So, that explained it. The hand-to-hand combat began with a set of punches on Leon's end. Clove made an art of evasion, dodging his blows effortless, though the last one grazed her left cheek. A change of strategy enabled her to go on the offensive as she ducked and then directed her right into his stomach. Leon arched forward in response, catching himself, then turning and thrusting his fist at her neck. Such an effort succeeded, and he used that to his advantage to knock her to the ground. He then began an assault against her teeth, the side of her face, almost going for her eyes before an instructor admonished against that. Clove only laid for a moment, but it was enough to cake her face in blood. She struggled to breath and rolled away, picking herself up. As she rose, Leon's face contorted into sick ferocity. "Why won't you give up?" he demanded, going for her abdomen, but making successive impact with her shoulder blade instead. Clove closed in on herself into a defensive curl. Leon stared, unsure, and the hit was swift. Clove motioned her hands into an intersection at the wrist mark and then swung outwards in a harsh gesture. Clove's arms then smacked Leon's face and he fell to the mat. She rolled up into an offensive position and snatched him by the collar of his shirt. In a move that surprised Cato, Clove managed to throw Leon over her shoulder into the opposite direction. It was an impressive move, but perhaps not the best for this fight. Clove took a second to catch her breath. Bad decision. Leon tackled her to the ground aggressively and began to punch her in the face. His pride had been shot, Cato figured, because that was all that could explain his sickening fascination with the way Clove's nose moved out of place as he continued to hit it with his fists. Shit. Leon continued his pattern, unrelenting. Hadn't his point been made? "Get off of her, freak!" Cato demanded aloud, surprising himself. Using this inertia, he ran past the crowd and pulled Leon off of her. The boy looked up. Kato gave him an expression of absolute revulsion and carried Clove away from the ring. The instructors appeared vexed, but called for the next 2 students. Clove was gasping for air, coughing harshly, and Kato couldn't think. What the hell was he supposed to do? Nero could help. Nero could, but by the time they found him, if they found him, what if it was too late? It was sink or swim. He rushed into a bathroom, not really sure which gender it belonged to, and set Clove on the sink counter. Her breathing hadn't improved and everything about her appearance hurt: swollen cheeks, blood gushing from her displaced nose, and her wild, wild hair. Everything was wrong and so out of his place. Kato ran a hand through his hair, tears threatening to spill down his cheeks as his hand trembled. "I'm sorry," he cried out. "I'm so sorry." Her hazel eyes found him. She started to speak, but began sputtering instead. They shouldn't have let him do that. "Why do you care?" she asked in a croak. "You hate me anyways." His throat was stuck, his chest felt heavy and remorse sat in a pit of his stomach. Clove's tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing messily with all the blood. It made him slightly sick. Kato pulled her forward and wrapped his arms around her. He brought the crown of her head to his nose and with a stilted breath, murmured, "I could never ever hate you, Clove." It was a succinct statement to sum up all the grief he'd carried for the past several months. He soaked a paper towel with water and began rubbing the blood of her face. It took a few good times, but he worked patiently to do the best he could without further injuring her. Without all the blood to mar her face, he was a bit uneasy of what had become of her nose. He offered her his hand in hopping off the counter and then the pair traveled towards the medical office in the annex. All things considered, the prognosis was good. Her nose would heal, but it'd be slow, and it would be difficult. As the two exited the annex, Clove's nose now bandaged, she grabbed Kato's arm. She gathered herself, and then said, "You shouldn't have helped me." Kato was instantly offended at the assessment and opened his mouth to retaliate. Clove quickly rose her arm towards his mouth and held his lips together. In a softer voice, she remarked, "I'm glad you did." When she released his lips, he looked dumbfounded. She walked ahead of him, then turned back to him with a huff, "Get that stupid look off your face and let's go." Kato smiled. Clove didn't hate him either. There may have been hope for him yet. February, Hunger Games Year 67. "You're home late," Mars said, when he entered their home. Kato closed the front door behind him. He shrugged, pulling off his training shoes and stuffing them into his forest green duffel bag, then zipping it up. "How did your friend's demonstration go?" Kato flopped onto the couch. "She's not my friend." Kato paused, frustrated and unsure. "She's been single-handedly feeding for over 2 years. If that's not enough for you to want someone as your friend, I don't think I want in on that, buddy," Mars said, his green eyes lit up with amusement. With a teasing grin, he added, "Hey, maybe she's who you're made for." Kato stared him down with thinly veiled irritation. "Clove's 9," he reminded Mars. "Oh, Kato," he said, with sarcastic sympathy, "no one told you. So are you." In response, Kato gave his brother a mean scowl and crossed his arms. Mars laughed at him. "Chances are when you get older you might begin to feel different." "Nuu," Kato corrected, drawing out the word as if his brother was mentally delayed. "When I'm older I'll be in preparatory training to become tribute and Clove will probably be the last thing on my mind." "If you say so." "Take my word for it, Kato, a little kindness goes a long way when you've been starved of it so long." "She'll probably drop out by then, anyways," Kato said, unsure of how to piece together his brother's other comments. "She's not very good." "Yeah, but when people are meant to be together an invisible red string ties them together." "An invisible teal string, maybe," Kato contemplated. "Where's Raiden, then?" He frowned, giving his brother's torn jersey a perplexed once-over. "We had an altercation in which I was the winner," Mars replied, shortly. Kato cut that conversation thread short, because chances were it wasn't going anywhere good. If Mars wanted to cut his losses, he definitely wasn't thinking like the winner he claimed to be. "You're really lucky the annex gives you all the free supplies for being on the selection committee, because you don't take very good care of your stuff," Kato murmured. "When you're in the kind of training I am, we'll see what you think then." They laid in soothing silence before Mars added, "That's if you get that far. The demonstration instructors weren't very happy with you, and from what they did tell me, I think they are under the impression that I'm your keeper or something. I'm not. I hope they get that. I'm not your mother." "You'd be a better mother than," Kato began, before faltering at a punch to his gut. He was barely able to wheeze out a disdainful Mars. "What have I told you, Kato?" "What?" Mars snapped, his green eyes gleaming dangerously. "Don't be so blatant in your disregard." Kato turned the other cheek, nursing his battered pride. "I was just trying to say that she... Are we going to go through this again? You are old enough to know by now than to be so careless in the way you speak. It's like you don't want to make it to reaping age. Why do you even care?" Kato seethed, sending Mars a murderous look. "I probably won't anyways." "That's what they want, right? Maybe they can start over and have a better son next time." Kato, Mars warned, with a tone of finality in his voice. The boys stopped at the sound of the door unlocking. Immediately, both stood up straight. Kato grabbed his assessment card from the table, and clutched it firmly in place as their mother entered the room. His mother's blonde hair was wound unnaturally in curls. She placed her work satchel on the counter and looked at both boys with a sharp expression. She brushed a bit of silica dust away, looking steely and unimpressed with the both of them. "Welcome home, Mother," Mars greeted, politely. He tried to smile, before allowing the expression to fall from his face. "Assessment cards, boys," she demanded coolly, extending her left hand out expectantly. Mars avoided his mother's gaze, instead fixating on the frame on the wall behind her. He endured a great deal of hesitation in allowing her the 6x6 card, working to her gaze. Kato thrust his hand forward and Mrs. Elroy snatched his card with a look of contempt at her youngest son. Their mothers glanced over the stock cards and looked up to Mars coldly. "You were bested by your friend in evasive and defensive combat again. Care to explain to me how this boy Raiden manages to keep you constantly trailing behind him?" "It was a fluke, but just to cover my bases I went ahead and scheduled privates for defensive combat later in the week to brush up on more maneuvers." "And still it remains that you are performing dismally in long-range weaponry," their mother critiqued. "I'm doing better at hand-to-hand combat, Kato offered. "I'm getting really good at swordsmanship, too. You're third in your cohort for swordsmanship. That means 2 people can best you, and really all they need is 1. Kato grew sullen at her words. "I'm the youngest student in my cohort. How am I supposed to win if I'm so much smaller than everyone else? Not letting me eat makes it a lot harder to get any stronger." Mars quickly moved in front of him, pulling his wrist into a strong hold. Kato held a breath. "Oh, Kato darling, you misunderstand. You aren't weak because we do not overindulge you," their mother said, sweetly. Mars kept his cover. "You are weak because you are not strong-willed enough. Mars maintains same the regimen as you, after all, and he performs much better for the most part." "Mom, Mars started, in a wave of nerves. "You may be terribly disappointing," their mother ignored him, lifting Mars' chin up to her, "but at least you don't make excuses." Kato began shaking, still frustrated. Mars' grip on his wrist has deepened and it took all Kato had not to cry out. "You are dismissed," their mother said to Mars, returning to her icy tone as she turned to him. "I expect top marks next week. Do not embarrass me." As soon as Mars released his wrist, Kato trembled. Mars squeezed his hand gently in return, before leaving for his own room. The walls around Kato seemed to close in as their mother filled the gap that been occupied by Mars. I. Kato began, anxiously. His mother pulled a small rod from her pocket, which she was able to extend by dragging the top piece outwards. With a self-satisfied expression she asked, "Kato, darling, why ever do you believe we're starving you?" His mother's expression was one of exhaustive contempt. Kato stood, bewitched, trapped. If he answered her, she could lash out. If he continued to avoid her, she definitely would. Her green eyes sparkled, glimmering intensely with anticipation. He lowered his head. What could he do? His stomach churned and the dizziness returned. "I'm sorry," he cried out, biting his cheek anxiously. The minute the words escaped his lips, he knew they were a mistake. He figured that at this point he'd do anything to avoid tears and seal his fate. "Oh, darling," his mother said, sweetly. A thwack sound resounded as the yellow rod made contact with the side of his face, leaving a red mark in its wake. Cato fought the instinct to soothe his cheek. "Now I will prepare you dinner and you will stop insisting that I starve you. Honestly, it's undignified to be so histrionic." His mother left him standing there entirely bewildered. Cato swallowed nervously and brought his school bag into the kitchen. As he sat down, his mother unlocked the cupboards and fished around for a pot. Cato pulled a textbook from his bag and turned to his assignment. He grabbed his school notebook, a notebook with a piece of white paper taped to the inside cover with the words "Good luck today" inscribed. Every few minutes he would turn back to his mother and watch as she worked with a smile. He wondered to himself what it would take to make such a look a regular occurrence in this house. Lost in his thoughts, he never saw it coming. He screamed out in response to the burns spreading across his skin and fell to the ground. As he made impact with the floor, he yelped again. His mother's voice grew distorted, but he could hear the condescension. "Since you're obviously not too keen with your strategy courses, here are few tips. Never turn your back to a potential danger, and remember darling, everyone is a potential danger." She sauntered off with an amused cackle, and although Cato would have liked to do nothing but lie there forever, he begrudgingly worked to lift himself off the soaked tiles. He fell to the floor again, choking a sob, but he persisted. He took a heavy breath and dragged himself on all fours towards his bedroom, though it took 15 minutes to move 20 feet. As soon as he made the carpet, he passed out, letting grief take him. Cato woke some time later, realizing that he was in his bed. What happened, he wondered. Had he fallen asleep doing schoolwork? His eyes fluttered open, and he rose, suddenly overwhelmed by pain. Biting down on his lip, he stalled in place. "It's going to hurt for a while, Cato. Try to relax." Ma's voice was restrained, with his tone holding a slight rasp to it that reminded him of when Nero had had a cold a few months back. Cato remained still, focusing on the wall in front of him, where a framed poster from the 60-second Hunger Games hung ominously. The close-up of Inoberia Jamison, with her teeth sunk into the throat of her last contender, made his stomach clench in that moment. "You're not relaxing," his brother reprimanded. Cato closed his eyes and Ma's subsequent words became more difficult to comprehend, but the hand stroking his hair soothed him. In several minutes' time, his brother's hand trembled and he knew his brother was crying as he spoke. "I'm sorry I'm not strong enough to protect you. I would do anything I could to take you away from here." Cato felt tears blurring his vision, too. If Mars couldn't help him, then no one could. Underscore 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 underscore. As soon as the alarm dismissed their class the next day, Dicey was at his side. They trudged along as they left the school building behind them. As they walked together in silence, Cato considered how Dicey had compared the two of them when challenging Clove the previous day. He'd never contemplated the similarities, but Dicey was right. They were both small for their age, though Cato had more muscle. In other regards, they largely diverted. Dicey had reddish-brown hair that was longer than the rest of them. He also had a whole spatter of freckles, much like Clove did. "You don't look good, Cato. Did the trainers discipline you for helping Clove?" Dicey asked, quietly. "No," Cato said, looking at the open dirt road path that laid in front of them. "I left before they could." Dicey spun into place in front of him and stole the duffel bag from his hands, walking a bit quicker now. He looked back at Cato with a kind expression. "I'm not allowed to attend any more of the Year 64 showcases anymore. My grandfather says there's no point in studying what you've already mastered, and my mom always listens to him, even though he's a jerk." "He thinks you've mastered hand-to-hand combat?" Cato asked, his backpack bouncing painfully against his burns as he began to laugh. The sun warmed the two as they left the path and descended into the heart of District 2 West. "He would have lost his mind if he knew I lost to someone like Clove," Dicey said, rearranging the weight of his and Cato's bags in his arms as they made their way past a crowd of workers on drinking hour. "You don't seem upset she bested you," Cato responded, elbowing him slightly. At Dice's wince, Cato created a respectable gap of space between the two of them. Why should I be? It'll never happen again, that's for sure. Besides, she taught me a few things I needed to relearn. 1. It's best not to underestimate your enemy. 2. There's more to close combat than just your fists and kicks. And 3. That while it's important to know your enemy's movements, it's much more important to know their state of mind. Is that why Nero tends to you so much? Because you're not such an idiot underneath it all? Cato inquired. Dice's only response was to stick out his tongue. No, Nero's just the best strategist of us all. He knows the easiest way to become a threat to someone is to dig yourself under their skin. Underscore 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 underscore. February, Hunger Games year 67. Clove had been staring at the faded target in disbelief for several minutes. She turned her head to the side and squinted her eyes, but the image remained. Had her dagger really hit the center for the third time in a row? It all seemed so unreal. So there 8-year-old Clove Holloway reluctantly stood. She bristled in her indecision, working to pluck up the nerve to make another attempt. Finally, testing her good fortune, Clove made another throw. A jolt ran through her heart when the dagger again hit dead center. That's all she needed to take the momentum and spin her gears into motion. Some time later Clove made Cato out in a reflection of the glass door. He was out of his training attire for the day and instead donned a long-sleeved orange shirt and blue denim jeans. She didn't bother to acknowledge him as he entered into the space she alone had been occupying. After a full minute of unbecoming silence, Clove called to him. "What you doing here?" she asked, her back still to him. "I'm not ready to go home yet," Cato answered, his voice soft and wary. At his reluctance in his tone, Clove turned to meet his eyes. He remained in place, holding his school bag by a single strap. "You mind?" Clove shook her head slightly as the boy slid comfortably against the glass wall. As Cato dug through his backpack, she turned back to her target, aimed the dagger once again, and released it. 16 hits in total. Cato raised his head from out of his book bag and pulled out a small, dusty novel with a rather worn cover. He glanced at the target curiously and then redirected his eyes back to the petite, pigtailed girl and murmured with slight awe, "Nice work, Clovey," before returning to his book. Underscore 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 underscore. Cato soon found himself consumed as he read the work of fiction. It told the tale of a historic time period before the existence of Panem. The novel's setting described the western part of North America, what Panem had once been before it had developed into its current state of glory. Cato began creating maps in his ruminations, wondering how close the setting was to District 2 West. District 2's climate is so diverse because of its origins, their teacher had said earlier in the day. Our district is composed of what were once separate states formerly recognized as Arizona and Utah. These boundaries were eradicated and reconstructed in the formation of Panem. The same could be said nationwide, where geological occurrences affected the topography of our country. The outlaws in the novel were vicious, constantly drinking, swearing, and pillaging. Instead of swords or spears, though, they capitalized on guns as their weapon of choice. H.M. Cato shook his head and considered that maybe he had overestimated the capabilities of the novel's men. It didn't take much skill to manage a firearm, he lamented. Then again, he couldn't say that for certain, as he'd never seen one in person. "Hey Clove," Cato called out, looking up to her with wonder. "You ever seen a gun in real life before?" She turned back to him and shrugged. My papa works for the military." That explained a bit, he thought. "But they can use other weapons besides guns, right?" Clove frowned, sizing him with ire. "Of course they do," she said, turning the other cheek. "The military people trained like us when they were our age, but guns are faster. That's why they use them. Papa says no point wasting time on worthless traitors." "Okay," Cato replied, musing over her perspective. He quickly fell back into the novel and Clove resumed her practice. The central character in the novel, James Phillips, was traveling to the Old West to mine gold. Cato wondered if it was supposed to be as dangerous as quarrying stone. James Phillips wanted to save enough money and then bring his expecting wife and young son to settle in a place they'd called California. California was even more west and it was very large, its length spanning both the combined length of Utah and Arizona. Part of what California was is now a neighboring district, their teacher had said. Of course, James Phillips hadn't been very bright. He was constantly conned out of his earnings as he pursued success, which made Cato want to fling the book as far away from himself as possible. Still, his persistence was at least in line with District 2 core values. Cato brought his knees to his chest, placing the book beside himself, and watched Clove intently. Clove's endurance slowly ran thin, resulting in less and less accuracy with each shot. Cato could relate, it was getting difficult to keep his concentration, so instead he fixated on the floor until it darkened slowly and then vanished altogether. Underscore 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 underscore. Cato was fast asleep by the time Clove decided to formally retire for the day. She left the glass room briefly to redress in regular clothing and returned with her messenger bag slung over her shoulder. Taking a seat across from the slumbering boy, Clove opened her bag and withdrew a smashed sandwich. She nibbled quietly and swallowed when she noticed his features tighten as he nearly woke. He looked to be in an unbearable state of pain from what she could read from the look on his face. She wondered if it'd be better for him to take a medical leave now rather than later. It was tricky. While she loathed him for his weakness, she found she loathed herself even more for not finding it a detracting quality. Grumbling in self-chastisement, she moved a stray blonde lock out of his face and studied him. He was a pathetic sight to behold, shivering despite the redness in his skin. Who fell asleep so early in the day? The clock hadn't even struck 6. Cato, she whispered as quietly as she could. Cato moved slightly as his body emitted a yawn and he blinked the sleep out of his eyes. He stretched his body and wiped stubbornly at his face. He frowned at her and she sent him a dirty glare in return. "Here, take it," she said, offering him some of her sandwich. Cato devoured it instantly. "The last time I made a sandwich for someone else was when my mama was pregnant with Magni, but every time I look at you I feel like you could use some more sandwiches." He immediately took it for the criticism that it was. Cato scowled, "What are you talking about?" Then he added for articulate effect, "Shut up, Clove." Still, he struggled to maintain the same animosity as he lurched forward, his anger suddenly replaced by a look of acute nausea. Cato held his stomach and looked ready to regurgitate everything he'd just ate onto the tile before him. "I didn't do anything," she said immediately, already defensive. Cato shook his head, averting eye contact. "I know. It's okay. It's what happens every time I eat meat. Why don't you eat any meat?" "I don't think that's smart for someone training in hand-to-hand and swordsmanship," she said, rooting through her things until she found the folded paper bag. "If you get too sick, you can use that. I don't get a lot of opportunities to. So I've never been able to hold much down when I do, and now the smell of it hot makes me queasy. I eat it when I can, but that's not a lot." Clove handed him an orange that he accepted graciously. "Picked them myself." "Well, I like grapes the best, but they're really expensive. Apples are good, too." Cato pulled the skin apart and took his first bite. He relished the juiciness of the orange and messily ate the whole thing while Clove watched him with a touch of morbidity. Releasing a stilted breath, Cato confessed quietly. "My parents don't let me eat, Clove. That's why I'm the worst in the whole cohort." "You're not the worst in your cohort," she corrected immediately, pulling unconsciously at her soiled shoelaces. Clove didn't dare to call out the injustice of it all. "Ah," she grimaced, her nose still in a torrid state. He gave her a warm smile at the apparent hesitance, before returning to a state of neutrality. "Don't look at me like that. It's the worst when people pity you. When it's your turn, when it's your chance, you'll show them all just how dumb they were for doing that," Clove told him, her eyes glimmering. Kato couldn't mask his glimpse of surprise quickly enough, allowing her to give him an easy grin. She continued, "It's different with you, because you'll have more than just the training. You will have survived more than anyone could imagine. It's like a lifelong Hunger Games, sorta." In the distance, the sun began to set, and the two watched it together. Clove turned away and thought aloud. "I'll never let them underestimate me, and if they do they'll find themselves on the wrong side of knife. I'll turn them into a real piece of art like Athena Mansfield. Underscore 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 underscore. Though his doubts and insecurities outweighed the gold he'd place on her in a fight, Kato couldn't help but to admire Clove's gumption. They sat together in silence, leaning against the glass wall as they watched students come and go and as the glow began to fade. One day he would win. One day he would have a home in Victor's village and Mother would finally see just how hard he'd worked for her. He'd ask her respectfully to consider leaving Ma's home in Victor's village and come to live in his own. He hoped his father would join and help them both pursue their Victor's talents. Once he won, he knew his parents would dote on him with the bridling affection for bringing pride to not only to his mother, but to the whole of District 2. They'd recognize that he could do it and do it with glory. He couldn't wait for the day to come. And if the other tributes dared to stand in his way, they'd be dead before they made a single move. Underscore 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 underscore. July, Hunger Games Year 68. Underscore 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 underscore. 14-year-old Ellery Watson sauntered down the centralized pathway of District 2's training annex with a rather impressive amount of grace for a girl her age. When the teen thought of her sister, 10 years and counting, and the way her honey-hued locks constantly fell in her face, she wondered if this all was just a ruse. It had to be. She couldn't imagine any alternative. In her poor sister's defense, the value of her so-called education at the annex seemed to be on a rather steep decline. This place was much better suited for street dogs, she thought as she watched the mangy group of boys pass her. They droned on cheerfully about meaningless droll that only pinpricked her nerves even further. "The things you've reduced me to," Pax Ellery thought, exhaling, and putting herself into motion. She immediately narrowed in on the ringleader. Paxton had said this boy was the best of his cohort. "One of you wouldn't happen to be Felix Gray?" she inquired with a sweet chirp, quelling the tense flush coursing her skin. The group turned to her with a diverse array of responses. The shortest boy, with a mop of reddish-brown hair, watched her intensely. The second tallest, the tawny-skinned boy with scruffy black hair and chestnut-brown eyes, looked up at her with an unbecoming smirk. His carefree and confident face quickly caught her attention, and while still fresh-faced and sharp, he became pliable in her hands. His blonde-haired friend and the other boy, the tallest, a fair-haired brunette, watched attentively as he stepped forward. "I knew climbing the ranks came with unwritten benefits," he said, flirtatiously. Ellery barely suppressed her repulsion at the 12-year-old, replacing her look of bewilderment with an artful maneuver of sweet seduction. "You little ones have us all in a stir, you know that?" she asked, "that Clove girl from year 64 especially. She and my sister are the same age, and my poor sister was absolutely heartbroken when she heard Holloway tell her friends that you boys were all prattle, but no proof. Terribly upsetting for my poor sister. She knows better than anyone that with you young ones word certainly gets around fast." The blonde boy was the only child to form a nuanced reaction, which was one of immediate skepticism. The others had only ascertained that the statement was an attempt to challenge their abilities. Felix, the boy Paxton spoke most of, stepped forward again with a gutsier front. "I'm the highest-ranking student in my cohort. Say it again if you're so sure." Hook, line, and sinker. Ellery gave him a derisive smile. "I'm only relaying what I've been told. If you're so sure I'm misinformed, You'd do best to challenge the source. Only Clove Holloway can take back what she's put forward. With a moment of contemplation, Felix's face softened. No, he tempered his breath and shook his head. If I go and shut her down, there's no coming back from that. He turned to his friends and asked them, maybe I should go talk to her. Ellery scoffed. If she didn't bring your abilities into question on her own, you certainly have. A skilled candidate has more tactical maneuvers than their fists, the tallest boy challenged, drawing Felix back. Fist fighting with Clove wouldn't solve anything. It'll just create more problems, Lix. What are your rankings, then? She challenged in return. It's easy to make this choice for him when you have less at stake. 12 of 97, the boy with reddish-brown hair piped up. He failed to hide an unnerved flush, freckles dotting his face, though his eyes caught her curiously. 17th, the tallest boy responded. He watched her as well, with wary distrust, though their attention quickly converged on the blonde boy. Well? Ellery demanded. He balked at her in return. What's your ranking, then? Tension diffused for a brief moment and the boys loosened their posture. 4th of 72, she said, breezily. Though we're much more efficient in cohort 60. You all like to waste valuable time tearing each other down, but our cohort challenges one another in a collaborative effort. My sister says Holloway is the top-ranking girl in their cohort now. She's become a comeback kid so fast I can see why she'd think you're all talk. What have you been doing while she's been shooting right on past? Felix opened his mouth to counter her argument, but stopped when he realized she wasn't quite done. You might be bigger than she is, but she seems to be quite a bit smarter. Ellery didn't miss their expression of surprise. They didn't know, she realized with sudden satisfaction, before she continued. I'm sure her comments are manageable for now. She's only a flicker, but you wouldn't want it to become a flame. Like I said, you all waste time tearing each other down. In a situation like that, this could be seen as a weakness, as being soft to the touch. We aren't soft, cunt, the boy with reddish-brown hair snarled. Joy bubbled in Ellery's chest. Now, this was fun. You hardly can be bothered with defending your honor, she turned to the blonde boy who hadn't yet spoken. The blonde boy stood on edge, barely restraining himself. It's Clove we should be after, Cato. We need to shut this down before it spreads, one of them corrected. Cato hardly retreated, a feral madness in his eyes. Felix plucked him backward, agreeing with the other boy, and reoriented him in the opposite direction. If Ellery didn't know any better, she'd have thought they knew exactly where little Clove would be. This was going to be good. Underscore 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 underscore. You're not supposed to run in the hallways. Nero called between breaths. No one's pace slowed and his words went unanswered. Why did Clove always do this? Why couldn't she be like the other girls in her cohort? They could watch demonstrations in a happy, mediated cluster and enjoy their meals together in cohesion. No, Clove was never one to obey rules of any form, or play nice, and so of course he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. That's why Clove was willing to initiate fights with older students, even though it was strictly forbidden. That's why she'd throw knives without care, even when it was against their rules to remove weapons from classrooms. That's why she was willing to. Nero froze, his eyes widening in horror. That's why she was willing to turn on two completely separate training machines at once, creating a barrage of mini-darts and precision arrows aiming directly for her. Holy fucking shit. This was not going to end well. Clove was going to die, and if she died, he'd be dead. Nero ducked, throwing himself over Clove protectively, and pushing her from the line of fire. A dart barely skimmed his left forearm and he pushed her underneath himself. Stay down. Dicey looked perplexed as he scanned for an opening. Finally, he charged in, dodging several arrows and mini-darts in an impressive gymnastic endeavor as he maneuvered himself to the machine control. Dicey caught his breath and jumped upwards to turn the control mechanism off. The mats were littered in the weapons. Cato brushed them aside to create a path for them. Are you okay? He asked, trying to catch his breath. Yeah, I'm fine. I knew Clove began to defend to herself. And then Nero saw red. He'd had it with Clove fucking Holloway. As she turned her cheek and opened her eyes, he barely resisted the impulse to spit in her face. The impulse to punch her in the face. That he didn't quell as much. When he caught the vulnerable expression affixed to her face, he could hardly stand it. It enraged him so much. So, Nero went for the gold and hit her again. He pulled back, feeling satisfied. If only he could unsaddle himself from this burden. Every day it rested on his shoulders and he didn't know how much he could take. Kato cleared a way for others. Before they could rise, her body was stolen from him and the others descended on her relentlessly. Each of them was punching, kneeing, hitting, and even pulling at Clove's growing hair. Though she attempted to fight them off in a catch of breath, she'd quickly be slammed down to mat and detracted from her attempts to communicate by a growing collective of aches and injuries. Clove was able to make out a screech, but not much else. Dicey seemed to make sure of that as he went for the nose, the teeth, her cheeks. Time seemed endless after a while. He lost count of wreckage, and to say Clove looked worse for the wear was an understatement. Accompanying his mother once on a work-related venture, he'd seen brutalized quarry workers appear better after a rock slide. The mats were slick with her blood, wounds covering every unclothed surface, her neck, her face, arms, teeth, knees. Sweat and tears struck down the side of her face. Felix caught his eyes as he attempted to re-regulate his own breathing. Finally someone called out, "I think we're done here." Nero felt dizzy and too dazed to process who must have said it, but as he gave Clove one last look over, his confidence swelled and he knew. If he could do this, he could do anything. He could make his first kill, take one's last breath, and bring only the greatest honor to District 2. After all, if he could decimate his own family, then what would keep him from putting a much less worthy stranger into their hollow grave? But in the end, little of any of this mattered, as what followed next truly caught him off guard. "I am not weak," Kato called out. Nero couldn't say he wholly agreed. It appeared, however, that Kato was slowly learning. That's why Nero wasn't surprised when he heard a snap and saw that Clove's wrist, her throwing wrist, was a mangled mess. And then his bearings returned to him. Shit. What the fuck had he just done? Underscore 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 underscore. July, Hunger Games year 68. Underscore 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 underscore. 14-year-old Ellery Watson sauntered down the centralized pathway of District 2's training annex with a rather impressive amount of grace for a girl her age. When the teen thought of her sister, 10 years and counting, and the way her honey-hued locks constantly fell in her face, she wondered if this all was just a ruse. It had to be. She couldn't imagine any alternative. In her poor sister's defense, the value of her so-called education at the annex seemed to be on a rather steep decline. This place was much better suited for street dogs, she thought as she watched the mangy group of boys pass her. They droned on cheerfully about meaningless droll that only pinpricked her nerves even further. "The things you've reduced me to," Pax Ellery thought, exhaling, and putting herself into motion. She immediately narrowed in on the ringleader. Paxton had said this boy was the best of his cohort. "One of you wouldn't happen to be Felix Gray?" she inquired with a sweet chirp, quelling the tense flush coursing her skin. The group turned to her with a diverse array of responses. The shortest boy, with a mop of reddish-brown hair, watched her intensely. The second tallest, the tawny-skinned boy with scruffy black hair and chestnut-brown eyes, looked up at her with an unbecoming smirk. His carefree and confident face quickly caught her attention, and while still fresh-faced and sharp, he became pliable in her hands. His blonde-haired friend and the other boy, the tallest, a fair-haired brunette, watched attentively as he stepped forward. "I knew climbing the ranks came with unwritten benefits," he said, flirtatiously. Ellery barely suppressed her repulsion at the 12-year-old, replacing her look of bewilderment with an artful maneuver of sweet seduction. You little ones have us all in a stir, you know that? She asked, that Clove girl from year 64 especially. She and my sister are the same age, and my poor sister was absolutely heartbroken when she heard Holloway tell her friends that you boys were all prattle, but no proof. Terribly upsetting for my poor sister. She knows better than anyone that with you young ones word certainly gets around fast. The blonde boy was the only child to form a nuanced reaction, which was one of immediate skepticism. The others had only ascertained that the statement was an attempt to challenge their abilities. Felix, the boy Paxton spoke most of, stepped forward again with a gutsier front. I'm the highest-ranking student in my cohort. Say it again if you're so sure. Hook, line, and sinker. Ellery gave him a derisive smile. I'm only relaying what I've been told. If you're so sure I'm misinformed, you'd do best to challenge the source. Only Clove Holloway can take back what she's put forward. With a moment of contemplation, Felix's face softened. No, he tempered his breath and shook his head. If I go and shut her down, there's no coming back from that. He turned to his friends and asked them, maybe I should go talk to her. Ellery scoffed. If she didn't bring your abilities into question on her own, you certainly have. A skilled candidate has more tactical maneuvers than their fists, the tallest boy challenged, drawing Felix back. Fist fighting with Clove wouldn't solve anything. It'll just create more problems, Lix. What are your rankings, then? She challenged in return. It's easy to make this choice for him when you have less at stake. 12 of 97, the boy with reddish-brown hair piped up. He failed to hide an unnerved flush, freckles dotting his face, though his eyes caught her curiously. 17th, the tallest boy responded. He watched her as well, with wary distrust, though their attention quickly converged on the blonde boy. Well? Ellery demanded. He balked at her in return. What's your ranking, then? Tension diffused for a brief moment and the boys loosened their posture. 4th of 72, she said, breezily. Though we're much more efficient in cohort 60. You all like to waste valuable time tearing each other down, but our cohort challenges one another in a collaborative effort. My sister says Holloway is the top-ranking girl in their cohort now. She's become a comeback kid so fast I can see why she'd think you're all talk. What have you been doing while she's been shooting right on past? Felix opened his mouth to counter her argument, but stopped when he realized she wasn't quite done. You might be bigger than she is, but she seems to be quite a bit smarter. Ellery didn't miss their expression of surprise. They didn't know, she realized with sudden satisfaction, before she continued. I'm sure her comments are manageable for now. She's only a flicker, but you wouldn't want it to become a flame. Like I said, you all waste time tearing each other down. In a situation like that, this could be seen as a weakness, as being soft to the touch. We aren't soft, cunt, the boy with reddish-brown hair snarled. Joy bubbled in Ellery's chest. Now, this was fun. You hardly can be bothered with defending your honor. She turned to the blonde boy who hadn't yet spoken. The blonde boy stood on edge, barely restraining himself. It's Clove we should be after, Cato. We need to shut this down before it spreads, one of them corrected. Cato hardly retreated, a feral madness in his eyes. Felix plucked him backward, agreeing with the other boy, and reoriented him in the opposite direction. If Ellery didn't know any better, she'd have thought they knew exactly where little Clove would be. This was going to be good. Underscore 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 underscore. You're not supposed to run in the hallways. Nero called between breaths. No one's pace slowed and his words went unanswered. Why did Clove always do this? Why couldn't she be like the other girls in her cohort? They could watch demonstrations in a happy, mediated cluster and enjoy their meals together in cohesion. No, Clove was never one to obey rules of any form, or play nice, and so of course he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. That's why Clove was willing to initiate fights with older students, even though it was strictly forbidden. That's why she'd throw knives without care, even when it was against their rules to remove weapons from classrooms. That's why she was willing to. Nero froze, his eyes widening in horror. That's why she was willing to turn on two completely separate training machines at once, creating a barrage of mini darts and precision arrows aiming directly for her. Holy fucking shit. This was not going to end well. Clove was going to die, and if she died, he'd be dead. Nero ducked, throwing himself over Clove protectively, and pushing her from the line of fire. A dart barely skimmed his left forearm and he pushed her underneath himself. Stay down. Dicey looked perplexed as he scanned for an opening. Finally, he charged in, dodging several arrows and mini darts in an impressive gymnastic endeavor as he maneuvered himself to the machine control. Dicey caught his breath and jumped upwards to turn the control mechanism off. The mats were littered in the weapons. Kato brushed them aside to create a path for them. "Are you okay?" he asked, trying to catch his breath. "Yeah, I'm fine." I knew Clove began to defend to herself. And then Nero saw red. He'd had it with Clove fucking Holloway. As she turned her cheek and opened her eyes, he barely resisted the impulse to spit in her face. The impulse to punch her in the face. That he didn't quell as much. When he caught the vulnerable expression affixed to her face, he could hardly stand it. It enraged him so much. So, Nero went for the gold and hit her again. He pulled back, feeling satisfied. If only he could unsaddle himself from this burden. Every day it rested on his shoulders and he didn't know how much he could take. Kato cleared a way for others. Before they could rise, her body was stolen from him and the others descended on her relentlessly. Each of them was punching, kneeing, hitting, and even pulling at Clove's growing hair. Though she attempted to fight them off in a catch of breath, she'd quickly be slammed down to mat and detracted from her attempts to communicate by a growing collective of aches and injuries. Clove was able to make out a screech, but not much else. Dicey seemed to make sure of that as he went for the nose, the teeth, her cheeks. Time seemed endless after a while. He lost count of wreckage, and to say Clove looked worse for the wear was an understatement. Accompanying his mother once on a work-related venture, he'd seen brutalized quarry workers appear better after a rock slide. The mats were slick with her blood, wounds covering every unclothed surface, her neck, her face, arms, teeth, knees. Sweat and tears struck down the side of her face. Felix caught his eyes as he attempted to re-regulate his own breathing. Finally someone called out, "I think we're done here." Nero felt dizzy and too dazed to process who must have said it, but as he gave Clove one last look over, his confidence swelled and he knew. If he could do this, he could do anything. He could make his first kill, take one's last breath, and bring only the greatest honor to District 2. After all, if he could decimate his own family, then what would keep him from putting a much less worthy stranger into their hollow grave? But in the end, little of any of this mattered, as what followed next truly caught him off guard. "I am not weak," Kato called out. Nero couldn't say he wholly agreed. It appeared, however, that Kato was slowly learning. That's why Nero wasn't surprised when he heard a snap and saw that Clove's wrist, her throwing wrist, was a mangled mess. And then his bearings returned to him. Shit. What the fuck had he just done? Underscore 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 underscore. July, Hunger Games Year 68. Prestige and reputation were a minute-by-minute contest at the Annex. At the head of the week, you could be the grand champion with a loyal crew in your corner. Without due diligence, though, you could easily slip 10 spots in the rankings by Wednesday. Clove considered as much as she lay morosely, staring contemplatively at the ceiling of her medical suite. She'd had her share of visitors throughout the week, her mother, mostly, and her aunt, Ebony, then Magnilda, her younger sister, and one of her field instructors, who'd given her a once-over and had dismissively informed her that she'd best heal fast. So, when Paxton Watson's older sister appeared before her on this particular, Clove only mustered a blank expression. Ellery's long, sandy brown hair was in an impractically intricate manner unsuitable for any real workout. "You've got the wrong room," she told Ellery, almost quiet as a mouse. That only drew Ellery closer to her. As she narrowed the gap between them, Clove was better able to catch the subtle nuances in the older girl's bone structure. She was lean, but still well built, as if every muscle had been worked with exact precision to achieve such an outcome. "I can't believe they actually did it," Ellery remarked finally, appearing self-congratulatory in her disbelief. Clove cocked her head to the side. "If you want your own bed, you'll need to check in with day nurse." She then frowned. "But I don't know how much help they'll be since you've lost your marbles and keep talking to yourself." Ellery further approached Clove, leading the 10-year-old to clasp the blanket draped across her bed with a stern hand. "Have we gotten our message across?" Ellery responded, her vain facade vanishing. She moved closer with a vicious appraisal lingering on her face as she looked at Clove's wrist. "You must have. I'm sure you'll never make the mistake of spraining Paxton's arm ever again." "The only mistake I made is not breaking it," Clove argued, scrunching her nose in an unpleasant manner. Ellery continued forward. Clove gave her pocket knife a firm squeeze, her posture rigid, before threatening, "Get any closer, you wench, and you will be my first kill." "I don't care what the rules say." Ellery exhaled a cynical, caustic laugh. Her baby blue eyes narrowed as she pulled Clove towards her by a clump of her dark hair. "You're not the only one with a signature weapon, baby doll. If I decide to eliminate you, it'll be clean cut. Somewhere it can be appreciated it." With an uncoordinated motion, Clove nicked Ellery's forearm with the pocket knife. Ellery only smirked at the developing trail of blood running down her arm. "Boys are stupid. They can't help it, but I have to say those year 63 boys will buy absolutely anything you sell them." "Then it's not all that impressive that you conned them, then, is it?" Clove retorted, bored as she began turning away. Ellery released her, but continued her tirade. "My folks have always said it was a waste to come here. They don't think I could possibly learn anything here I couldn't learn from a more esteemed center back home in East. They're wrong, though. It's well worth the long train ride." She paused and then presented a question, "And I'd argue that I've learned plenty. Like, why put in the effort when you can outsource the work and save yourself the energy? In the games, I'll be running circles around the boys. Just you watch." The way she drivelled on, Clove would have originally thought Ellery was there on Paxton's behalf, but it became increasingly apparent that this was a sideshow, her slice of life routine. At least Paxton was direct, cutthroat in her criticisms. "You'll never win. You don't even have any friends, not here and definitely not in the games. Who'd want weirdo Clove in their alliance?" This, however, was complete insanity. To Clove it only further explained why Paxton was such a nasty little fucker. You'd have to adapt if you lived with a snake like this. And Ellery was so obviously one of those bright and shiny coral snakes that would gun down its prey in a hot 30 seconds. "But all you really said is that you're not good enough to win on your own," a voice chastised from the door. Ellery lost her cool expression, and the visitor continued. "If you ever do manage to volunteer, we'll all have a good time watching you get skinned alive." Ellery's expression blackened immediately. She sneered at Clove and strut out of the room with ferocity in her eyes, gazing towards the distance, but not before pushing Cato to the floor. Clove suppressed a snort at Cato's clumsy attempt to recollect himself, dusting off his attire a minute later. Smoothing himself out, he gave her a benevolent smirk. "What do you want?" Clove demanded immediately. If he thought he was getting out of this that easily, he was deeply mistaken. She gave him a once-over and stewed in her irritation. Cato cocked his head to the side, considering. "She called me stupid." "Yeah, I can see why you're surprised. It's probably the only truthful thing she's said all year." "Clove," he scolded. "You can't keep trying to kill me and then apologize every time you realize how dumb of an idea that might be. Go away, Cato." Her hand remained firmly attached to the pocket knife. Cato looked away shamefully. She said she heard you saying to one of your friends that you thought we were weak, that's what she said, and..." Cato replied, soft and unsure. He took a seat beside her bed. "And we're not, Clove. We're not weak. We had to defend our honor. We couldn't let this get around to the other guys in our year." "Wow, she's right. You really are stupid," Cato. Clove snapped brazenly, then added with a scowl. "I don't have any friends. So even if I did think you were weak, who would I tell?" Tears welled up in Clove's eyes, the loathing and ferocity lingering, but he held his ground. "Of course you have friends," he said dismissively. We're your friends, duh. The foolproof tactic fell short as she replied with disdain, what are you talking about? We're not friends, you stupid asshole. Clove. You remember when we were really little and you said you'd hurt my family, she asked, glaring at him. I didn't tell you, but my father's a military interrogator. Do you know what they do? She asked him, a callous look in her eyes. He shook his head, feeling unease at the way her restrained anger choked the air. They torture people for secret information. She gave him a sickening smile. I'm done with all of you and how you are. If I have to get Papa's help to get you to leave me alone, I'll tell him, and you make sure you to tell Dicey and Felix that too. But I mean it, Cato. If any of you ever speak to me again, you'll wish you were dead. In that moment, Cato Elroy grieved the loss of Clove Holloway as he knew her. He continued to look down, but nodded faintly. Okay, he replied, softly, still stunned, and gave her one last look before leaving her hospital room. Underscore 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 underscore. She's probably blowing hot air to get a rise out of you and you're taking the bait, Felix said. He watched Cato with great interest, but the blonde was too uneven to provide him a response. Come on, focus, Cato. There's no point in getting scared over something that isn't even true. I know, it's just. Cato trailed off. Her family has money, that's for sure. I've seen her get picked up in a car Dicey offered. It'd take my mom the rest of her life and mine and Callan's and Hallie's whole life to save up for half a car. Felix's face was contemplative and all he could manage in return was, that could mean anything. The only person I know with a car is Nurse Ebony. We'll have to ask Nee. Are you sure that's what she said? Dicey asked. She said that we're bad friends and she doesn't want us to be around anymore and that she's not afraid to have her dad come torture us if we bother her again, Cato said, shaking. Something told Felix that wasn't a verbatim recitation of the pair's conversation, but he didn't push it. Last thing he needed was Cato drawing attention to unwelcome admirers. Well, I don't think it's true, Felix remarked. If he really works for the military they wouldn't live this far out. It's like a 3-hour train ride to North. Dicey piped up in disagreement, but they might if their entire family is already here. It seems expensive to travel back and forth so often. If they can afford 2 cars to begin with, I don't think money is gonna stop them. So what if he is an interrogator? Felix asked. That's kinda cool, actually. I wonder if I get on her good side if she'll introduce me. A mirthless laugh escaped Dicey's lips. Something tells me you're the last person Clove Holloway would do a favor for, Felix. Felix sulked, not if I make it worth her while. As Nero joined them, Felix turned to him, and asked, Nee, good. You're late, you know. Hey, your mom owns a car. How much money do you have to make to do that? Nero shrugged. I don't know. My uncle gave it to her when she started working at the annex, so probably a lot. She's been paying him back ever since cause she already feels like he does too much for her. She says a Kaiser always does their own work. Oh, Dicey frowned. That doesn't help us, then. Why? Nero asked, offering part of his sandwich to Dicey. Dicey rooted through his bag and gave him a nectarine in exchange. Thanks, Nero said, taking a bite and smiling at him. This is a really good one, Dice. Well, I'm good at what I do, he joked in return. Real good, princess. Now shut the fuck up, so we can get back to the point, Felix said, flicking his forearm. Anyways, sorry, to answer your question, Clove doesn't want to be our friend anymore. She didn't mention him, actually, Cato said, speaking for the first time in several minutes, but still sulking. I remember that much. Really? Felix asked. Wonder what that's about, Dicey remarked. Just the 3 of us, Cato said, adding bitterly, guess she forgives you, Nero. Trust me, Clove hates me, so it's not that, Nero said, waving him off. What does that have to do with cars, though? Felix leaned back against the tree covering them. She said her father is a military torturer and Kato's about to soil himself all over it. Military interrogator, Kato corrected. A military interrogator who tortures people. She said that we basically needed to fuck off and that if we didn't, she wouldn't hesitate to have her dad come find us. She said what? Nero demanded, infuriated. Kato looked at him rather sullenly. Why are you mad? She didn't even mention you. Military interrogators do not work that way, Nero told the group emphatically. They don't just come and hunt civilians, okay? They don't give a fuck about the likes of us when there are real criminals out there. Kato laid against his book bag and looked away. Well, I'll sure miss all of our sweet conversations, Clove. It wasn't meant to last, Dicey said, rolling his eyes as he threw out his arms in exaggeration. I have Callan and Hallie to worry about, so I can't take any risks that they'd get killed. Even if they do deserve it for being extra terrible this week. Felix took Kato's lead and also leaned back against the tree. That's a pretty empty threat to me, actually, if you put it that way. So, I don't know why she thought it'd work. Nero walked over with Dicey and dropped to the spot beside Kato. Hey, he said, softly. Clove's full of shit. Don't worry about her. It's not that, Kato murmured. I don't think she'd hurt me even if she wanted to, she's not like that. Then what is it? I didn't realize that I'd scared her so much that she felt she had to say something like that for me to leave her alone. We don't usually get along, but it's never been this bad. She said we were dumb for falling for Ella's trick because she doesn't have friends, and I told her that wasn't true because we're her friends. I always thought she saw it the same way, you know. But she said we were never her friend, and I guess I just feel like this is all my fault and I should have known better. Don't let her twist it around on you, Kato. Even if she didn't say any of what Ellery told us, I bet you she's thought it. So, yeah, she can be dangerous, but Clove isn't a threat. I don't know, Dicey replied into open air, interrupting their hushed whispers. If her cohort is as ruthless as ours, we might want to keep an eye out. You have seen Fox. She can be pretty scary and she ranks right under Felix and Kyler. If Clove ranks third in her cohort, it could be a real mistake to underestimate what she can do. Felix considered as much. Well, that certainly wasn't a mistake he was planning to make. Underscore 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 underscore. You cry in your sleep, you know, a familiar voice lulled in the distance, stealing her from the dreamy unrest. The world was spinning around her, distorted and chaotic, and Clove struggled to still it. Clove's chest constricted and she haphazardly dug through the bed sheets to find her guarded knife. When she realized it was missing, she froze in place, holding her breath. "HM," the voice questioned, confused. "Oh, yeah, I took the knife. Didn't want you thinking I was one of the figures from your nightmares and accidentally stabbing me. You can have it back when I'm done." She turned away from his voice and nestled into the pillow. When she made the decision to stab him, it wouldn't be an accident. "I've been thinking, you know," he prattled, losing her rather early into his rant of the week. "So, I'm gonna train you. It'll be 3 days a week around my privates." Still refusing to open her eyes and acknowledge him before her, she retorted, "Didn't Kato tell you my message? What do you want, hoodlum?" "Yeah," Felix said, sounding fascinated and disturbingly unperturbed by her threats, "you really freaked him out, H. But not me. I think it's so cool that your dad is an interrogator. You should have started out with that bit. I bet you'd have way more friends if you used that as your selling bit. Leave me alone, Fix. I don't need you to train me. I'd be just fine if stupid people stopped trying to kill me every time they had a bad day." "Ah, that can't be all true. You gave me a nickname to show off our extra special bond." "Yeah, it's a nickname because the less time I spend with you the better," Clove sighed, finally opening her eyes into the pitch darkness. "How long did I sleep today?" "It's 4," he said, absent-mindedly playing with the drawstring of his sweatpants. "It's 4 already," she gaped, sitting up in the bed, now very alert. "How am I going to catch up on all of the reading they sent me now?" Clove leaned over the side of the bed and picked up her book bag. With a swift motion, she withdrew a heavy, black hardbound text, stifling tears as her wrist stung in retaliation. "It's 4 in the morning, Holloway," Felix corrected with a stern, but also doubtful expression. He carefully removed the textbook from her hand and laid it over her blanket-draped knees. "It's still dark out, look," he said, pointing to the window. "Why would you want to train with me anyways? Every time we see each other you're always telling me how weak you think I am." She opened her mouth to add something, but became distracted by an incessant need to scratch at her fore. Felix gently pulled her hands away and began running his thumb over the back of her right hand. For someone so cold, she was stricken by how warm his hands were. Clove struggled against him, but he continued to hold firm. "I'm going to hold your hand so you stop scratching the fore. That'll make it worse. Okay. Your hand won't heal if you keep using it. You gotta let your body mend itself back together if you want any chance of being a competitor." Once the black cloud above her head vanished, questions began bubbling to the surface. "How did you get into my medical suite so early? I told Nurse Ebony we were family." "You told Nero's mom that you," she pointed at him, "are related to me." "Yeah," he said brightly. "So you know her?" "Of course I know her," Clove snapped, "and I'm pretty sure Nero's mom knows we're not related, Felix." "Yeah, I know," he replied. "But Nurse Ebony believes I didn't come here to hurt you, so why can't you, too?" Clove gave him a look of contempt and dismay that seamlessly blended together. "You broke my wrist 2 days ago. Just because Nero's mom isn't smart enough to figure out when someone's lying to her doesn't mean I'm not." Felix frowned, softening. "Hey, don't talk about Nurse Ebony that way. She's a good person, H. Because of her, kids like me can continue to train even when an injury should knock us out of the rankings forever. Well, duh. Every time she puts you back together, you hurt 10 more kids who can pay their hospital bill. You're like her stupid henchman. It's actually pretty smart on her part. Look, my point was that I guess she figured whatever I had to say to you was important enough to let me in," Felix conceded, finally. Clove waited for him to speak, a rather unimpressed expression on her face as he tried to frame his next statement. "I've been thinking about it for a while," Felix supplied in a casual tone. A tone that fully failed to reflect his intentions, she was sure, "and I think you're the right tribute to go in for Quarter Quell. That's the year Cato wants to go in. Go talk to him about it. Besides, I already decided I'm gonna go when I'm 18 so I don't have to share my house with my sister." Felix gave her perplexed frown. "They'll let your family move in with you even after you're 18, you know. I don't think it happens a lot, but it's not like a rule or anything that they can't." Clove hardly entertained the thought. "I already told you, ask Cato. He's the one who actually wants it and I don't even like you, so why would I care about anything you have to say?" "Look at the bigger picture," Felix argued, gesturing widely with his hands. "I'm going for a triple strike. 3 victories in a row. Me first, obviously, in the 74th games and then you in 75 to keep it interesting." Disdain lined her tone. "And then who?" "Still working that out," Felix broke in dismissively, looking terribly self-congratulatory for no reason in particular. "What if something happens to one of us before we can even enter?" she challenged. "That's over 5 years away. You don't even what could happen between now and then." Felix's grin fell from his face, but was quickly replaced by a reprimanding frown, challenging her. "There's no competition. I've been the best since the very beginning, so what exactly do you think could happen? I'm not sure that matters. Besides, even if something doesn't happen to you, something could happen to me. You try to kill me like every weekend." "Why do you even think I'm here?" he asked, not even bothering to stifle his yawn. "I'm gonna protect you." "From who?" Clove grumbled. "From yourself mostly, H," he said. Quietly, he added, "Do your force feel better yet?" Clove nodded slightly. He nodded in faint, exhausted approval, and released her hands. Leaning forward, he laid his head in her lap. "Good." And then he dozed off, leaving Clove quite unsure of what to do with him. underscore 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 underscore. It was a regular sideshow with the constant accompaniment that surrounded her following that conversation. I thought I told Cato to tell you all to leave me alone. Clove groaned when Dicey walked into her suite with a rubber ball in his hand. Dicey shrugged, mild bravado overcoming him. I don't answer to Cato, and more importantly, Clove, I don't answer to empty threats. Don't rely on Daddy to do your dirty work for you. That's lame. Clove glared at him. Make a name for yourself, Clove. People will respect you more for it. And how am I supposed to do that? She snapped, a brooding glance to her wrist. Dicey had the dignity to retreat within himself just a little at that comeback. Inevitably, Clove gave up on trying to scare him off and returned to her homework. Every few minutes, though, Clove would catch him watching her with curiosity. Eventually he gathered the courage to speak, and remarked, now rather bored of the disengagement, if it makes you feel any better at all I promise that book only gets even more boring from there. Clove closed the book and forcefully bit down a smile in response to his candor. I don't think that's possible, she lamented. It's pretty bad already. Dicey's dimples betrayed him as he grinned ear to ear, making him a rather endearing figure. I don't think I've ever seen you actually smile before, now that I think about it. So, she asked, feigning disinterest. You don't smile very much. Not around you. But you spend way more time around us than anyone else, really. If you think about. Oh, how could I forget? Drawing the blanket to her chest, Clove replied staunchly, let's talk about all the good memories. Like the time you tried to break my teeth, or the time you pulled my hair, or when. She continued to air her grievances against him and Dicey's face fell. One thing she figured out after enough time was that Dicey wasn't nearly smart enough to hide his thoughts like Cato did, tactical enough to choose his thoughts carefully like Nero, or brazen enough to share his thoughts without an ounce of care like Felix, and Clove couldn't help but to favor him least because of it. If someone was gonna put all of their cards on the table, they had to be willing to responsibility for how the game played. Dicey changed direction with the wind, though, rarely planting roots in a thought for very long, and so it was hard to know who he'd be the next day. She's good, you know. You wouldn't think it, but Ellery, she's really good. He lost his thought and exhaled, shaking his head. I'm really sorry, Clove. I should have believed you. She watched him place a hand over his heart, suddenly breathing heavily, swiftly. I fucked things up and I should have known better. Whatever this was, she knew she didn't particularly like it. She wondered to herself if the words had been hanging off his lips for weeks now, months even. It appeared likely that he'd held on to the words for a while now, a sure opening, and even though he was saying them to her, she wondered if the words were originally for someone else because since when did he care at all what she thought? After all of this, I'll be a much stronger candidate for the games. My bones will grow back stronger and I'll be stronger with them. Dicey brightened visibly at that, nodding slightly. Yeah, he said, more relaxed and steadying his breathing. She should have known it's best never to underestimate your opponents. Something tells me now she won't. Underscore 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 underscore. Towards the end of the day, she'd eaten dinner and worked a bit to re-engineer the grip of the throwing knife in her right hand. So far, her only reward had been anguishing pain. She released the knife and leaned back into the pillow. With that fruitless effort postponed, she began centering on the inconsequential items decorating the walls, medical posters, a whiteboard with her data, C. Holloway, born the 4th of February 1958, weight, 60 pound, height, 4'4", and syringe disposal containers. It didn't take long for her thoughts to stray to Felix's proposal. If the district won 3 years in a row, the games could be forever changed. This impossibility had, after all, contributed to whispers from older students that the capital had stacked the deck against trained districts when it became too predictable. Would the capital really do that? In a bid for honor, how fair would it be to disqualify a deserving entrant from their winnings because of a lack of intrigue? Then again, if a tribute couldn't take what was dished out, did they deserve to win? Nero, what do you want? Clove asked him finally, rather sour at the way he watched her with disdain but refused to speak his mind. He straightened up in his chair and his blue eyes found her. I don't want anything. I'm here keeping guard. You, she accused, hotly. You're the reason I'm in this mess to begin with. You threw the first punch. You're the reason you're in this mess. Nero retorted immediately, so, it's not like you're on my good side either. Well, it's not like I get any help from you. We're supposed to be on the same team, Nero. Yeah, then why have you been lying to me? I'm not. I never said any of whatever she said I did. Then why did I have to find out you're number 4 in your class from Ellery Watson, he demanded. Why would you keep that secret? That's what you're mad about. Rankings are posted on the wall. It's not my fault you never checked, she told him dismissively. And what the hell were you thinking telling Cato that Uncle Baltazar was going to come after him? Are you insane? Well, I needed to get rid of him somehow, and I did, Clove retorted. Military work is confidential. That means it's a secret. You can't just go around telling people because you're too weak to defend yourself. Nero argued. Well, maybe if you had told them to stop, I wouldn't have had to. Clove screamed back. Nero's face darkened. It's only going to get harder, Clove. If you're going to give up that easily, you might as well drop now and stop wasting the Annex's resources. Well, you're a waste of your dad's genes. She shot back, before realizing what she'd said. Finally, she added, much quieter now. At least he was loyal. You don't have a loyal bone in your body, Nero. The bile burned in his stomach at her remark. He stared her down, coolly. I'm done covering for you, Clove. They can chop off your head for all I fucking care. Underscore 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 underscore. There was a dullness that hung in open air. Cato peeled the skin off his orange and threw it into the trash haphazardly. A group of girls from his cohort passed him. A few greeted him as they saw him. He nodded vaguely in response, not doubting that they'd turn on him in a moment if it meant saving their own end. In the distance he heard a voice say, "That's him." It could have been a million miles away, but he'd always know his brother's voice in a heartbeat. That's when he got a good look at them. No, it couldn't be. "What do you want?" he asked the little girl who stood before him. The moment felt peculiar, as if he was reliving it. "You're Cato, right?" the child demanded. She couldn't have been older than 7, with her brown hair pulled into 2 pigtails on the top of her head. Her brown eyes were striking. He suppressed a laugh. She was a really cute kid, despite the fiery glare she was leveraging. "Yeah, I am," he said. He could get her back. He could get this moment back, he realized. It warmed his chest. "This first year has been around the universe and back trying to find you," Mars said, smiling widely and raising his eyebrows. His smile was wide, in fact, that it made Cato suspicious. "And how'd she find you, then?" Cato eyed his brother, warily. Mars' devilish grin only became more impish. The little girl before them seemed tactless, and possibly fearless. She quickly stepped forward without regard for status. "I just went to all the older kid rooms and waited until someone who looked like a Cato came out of them," she replied, as if it should have been obvious to him. Cato had a feeling there had to be more to it than that. Because despite sharing DNA, Ond wouldn't confuse the two. Mars was over a foot taller, with broader muscles, and a lighter skin tone. "Don't leave us pressed for details now. Tell us more about this classic Cato look." Mars prodded. Cato sent him a dirty glare. "Tall and really skinny, like a lamp post. Yellowish hair like a lamp post, too. And then skin like he's been in the sun for a real long time." The girl paused. "But not red, you know. Mostly, he's confused, like doesn't ever know what's going on." Cato grimaced. This hadn't been how he'd planned to relive this moment, and a sword connected to his arm. That part was a lie, though. You don't have a sword connected to your arm at all, she said, this time directly at him. Behind her, Mars was barely holding himself together. While a small part of him was glad to see his brother happy again, the bigger part wanted to axe him in the stomach and tell him to knock it off. Yeah? Kato asked, calmly, raising his eyebrows. Well, you found me. You're not as tall as I thought. He's taller, she observed, pointing at Mars. In the nick of time, Mars managed to make a full recovery and add. Whoever you got your intel from didn't mention that Kato is only 10. Oh, she paused, considering the thought. At least she picked the right PT for this quest, Kato mumbled to himself. Why did you hurt my sister's feelings for, then? You yelled at her and she got really hurt and her throwing arm is broken now. Within her outrage was a familiar flicker, a spark he definitely recognized. To Clove's credit, though, she at least had some subtlety. The little girl did not. So, he chastised himself for the glimpse of surprise that crossed his face when she made the decision to stomp on his wrist as retribution. Looking scandalized, he retracted his hand and began to self-soothe. She appeared entirely nonplussed by the altercation and he had to stifle his mother's advice, prodding him in the back of his mind. This girl was not the enemy. Before he had a chance to say anything in turn, Mars stepped forward, yanking the girl back towards the opposite wall. Kato quelled the concern that bubbled. Hey! That's not how you resolve problems with upperclassmen. Do you understand that? Kato took a sharp breath. The girl's lip quivered, tears forming quickly. Mars took a step back and this time said softly, you could be dismissed for that sort of behavior. I don't think your family would appreciate that. She sniffled, pushing a loose piece of hair back, and looked away from Mars. He sighed, slightly worn, and pat her on the head awkwardly. In turn, she bit her lip and launched herself onto Mars' left leg and began to cry. Mars gave him a reluctant expression. How bad is it? It hurts a little, but I dunno. I guess I'll do something else without it. He looked at his wrist. Though it stung, he was sure it'd heal shortly. Kato frowned. If this was the damage done by a young girl, then he could only imagine what Clove was suffering through after what they'd done. Mars pried the girl from his leg, giving her a half-hearted expression of encouragement. If you'd shown that much potential in your advisory board last month, we would have given you much higher marks. You mean I could be a candidate one day, she sniffled. It means you had the element of surprise on your side and that keeps people guessing. Who knows, we may make a tribute out of you yet. The little girl grinned, wide. I'm counting on it, sir. But that means you'll have to train hard, Kato said. She watched him, curious. When you watch the games next year, make sure to root for Mars. He's gonna train all year, just be the best in our whole region so he can win the fight. Kato, Mars chastised. I'll be rooting for you, Mr. Mars, the girl said, cheerfully. Mars shook his head. He bent to her level and whispered directly into her ear. She nodded and turned to him, whispering before running off. Kato leaned against the wall. What'd you say to her? I asked for her name. And she said that it's Magnilda G. Holloway and that I could call her Nellie. Underscore 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 underscore. October, Hunger Games Year 68. In the months following the boys' Ellery Watson-inspired attack, Clove's wrist still ached. She tried not to think about the amount of time she'd lost in her training regimen as a result of the setback, but she didn't have much more time to spare before things became unrecoverable. So on this day in particular, she sat in place sifting through the sand below her. Here and there she'd take a particularly impressive rock and add it to the plastic sandwich bag she'd kept from her lunch. After amassing enough rocks for her collection, she hoisted herself into a tree with one arm, and scaled up about 10 feet. Once she found an acceptable resting spot, she made herself comfortable against the tree trunk. As she nestled comfortably into place, the perfect victim made its way into her line of sight. Rusty yet, Clove? She asked herself. She concentrated on the chirping bird below and closed her eyes to enhance her focus. When she reopened her eyes, she took a deep breath and shot one of the rocks at the creature. The bird fanned its wings and made an agonized sound in response. "How many hits before you say die?" she murmured to herself, watching it struggle to fully spread its wings. The bird lost a few feathers as it faltered from its assault. Blood seeped from the apex of its back onto the concrete. She watched it with great fascination, counting 5 strikes before it succumbed to its wounds. Before Clove had an opportunity to hop down and examine her victim, a group of younger boys from the annex filed through the exit and crowded the bird. "Cool," a handful of them said in sync, watching the bird writhe in pain. One of them, no older than 7 or 8, promptly stomped on the bird and snapped its neck. This only further blooded the pavement below their feet. "Oh, what a rip-off. It didn't even make a noise. We could find more. There's lots of pigeons behind school #76, another of the boys suggested. The group grew in their excitement and scurried off together. As Clove pondered to herself how she planned to make up for the strenuous physical training she'd missed in the last several months, she spotted a familiar face. His carefree demeanor drew her ire almost immediately. She conserved and redirected that energy, wondering to herself how good her aim truly was against a creature with better reflexes than a small bird. She retrieved a rock from her bag, closed her eyes in attempt to center her energy, and then flung the rock directly into the back of Cato Elroy's neck. He spun around, spewing a few nasty words, and threw himself against the tree when he saw her looking down at him contemptuously. "What the hell was that for?" he demanded with a snarl, kicking the base of the tree a few times. "You know what for," she responded, coolly. Clove contemplated throwing a second rock at him for the expression of disbelief he held in response. "Are you crazy?" he asked, his mouth gaping open. Clove turned away from him and looked into the expanse of the city before them. There was a path of seemingly endless stores and building, and in a contrasting direction, a road leading back to rural school #76. "I said I was sorry months ago. What else do you want?" Cato asked, crossing his arms, and sulking. "I want you to leave me alone." "You're the one who threw a rock at me," he snapped in return, seemingly appraising the tree as if to determine whether he'd come after her. She bid him good luck in that venture. "You're not the one with a broken wrist. I'm on medical leave because of you." He jumped out of the way as she emptied her bag of rocks onto the ground below. They cascaded against the grass with a clunk. Cato rolled his eyes. "You're joking, right? Get over yourself already." "Excuse me," she demanded, revving up for a fight she couldn't possibly win. "Clove, come on," Cato said, imploring her to be reasonable. "I'm not allowed to eat. Mars doesn't even talk to me anymore now that he's in candidacy training, and training just keeps getting harder. So what? We deal with what we have to, because that's just how it works. Your parents hurt you," she added matter-of-factly. "You forgot that one, too." Cato was taken aback by the comment. His vulnerability slipped through, and so he said, very openly, "I'm used to people I trust hurting me. I just didn't think you'd have to be one of them, and I know that's not fair, because I hurt you first, but..." Clove jumped to ground. "Paxton Watson said I had no friends." "Yeah, so what?" "She says stuff like that all the time," he inquired, tiredly. "But I had you, right? You said we were supposed to be friends," she asked finally, her eyes brimmed with tears. "So, why'd you do it, Cato?" "I don't know. I guess everyone else's opinions mattered to me more than my own, but I'm really trying to be stronger now, I mean it." Her resolve softened at the sincerity in his voice. "Hey, Clovey, let's make a truce." He gingerly grabbed her hand. "No more throwing rocks and no more breaking wrists. You have a lot of rules, Cato Elroy." Cato laughed gently, and after some reluctance, wrapped his arms around her, and said quietly against her hair, "You're going to be the death of me someday, I know it. Underscore 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 underscore. Hunger Games Year 69. The pocket of darkness was an act of kindness. He snuggled within his blankets, pulling the book to his chest and then putting it aside a moment later. With a resigned expression, he lost his sense of time, knowing it dwindled with every breath. Eventually, the day would come and he would have his first of many opportunities to get one step closer to the intangible, to honor and bravery. Less than 8 weeks were left. Soon, he'd be eligible to test for the next bracket of his training. Before he could fully immerse himself in his blanket, a knock came, and light poured into the creak of his door. "Come in," he said, softly. His brother neared and then he heard the click of the lamp. Mars sat on the edge of his bed. While always muscular, his mass had certainly increased in the past year. It was almost as if he was a new person, less refined, but rougher, harsher, brutal even. "Hi," Kato said, quietly. "Hi," Mars replied. Kato looked up to his brother with curious eyes. "I was thinking after you finish your first year as potential tribute that we could visit 2 South," Mars said, his voice reluctant and throaty. Kato frowned at the injuries he glimpsed over on his brother. Yes, the hand-to-hand piece was important, but it was as if his wounds spoke for him. Decision-making was where he derived the majority of his strength, or at least, it was supposed to be, so Kato couldn't imagine what purposes the wounds were supposed to serve. "Kato. What, sorry. What do you think of a trip to 2 South? Mars asked, now rigid. "Yeah, I want to go," Kato said, springing to his feet. Then, remembering his place, he returned to his bed and stilled. "But, why? You're still interested in cowboys and all of that nonsense, aren't you?" Mars supplied stiffly, remaining uncomfortable. He was, but since when had that mattered? There had to be a catch of some sort. Mars was clever, calculating, because if he'd been gifted his brother's stipend, he's sure it would have been put towards food and an industrial lock to secure it. Then again, Mars didn't operate in the same way he did. Age and experience had gifted him more freedom and better allies, Raiden, his boyfriend, who doted on him and ensured he was well fed. Kato pursed his lips together in thought and suggested, "We should go somewhere you want." Mars sighed at that response, apparently discouraged. "I offered, because I want you to be happy, Kato." It's just Kato paused, thinking carefully, "If I fail my exam, I won't be allowed back. I'll lose everything." Mars had the diplomacy to appear surprised at such a revelation. "You're one of the best students in your cohort for specialty sword training. That already puts you at an advantage. You won't miss your target just because your test subject is a moving object, kiddo. It's not that bad. Promise." Kato remained quiet. Anything he could say would be construed as weakness. Instead, he just nodded his head and averted his eyes. "I heard in 2 East that they dig holes into the ground and pave them with concrete, and when they are done they add water. We should go there, too." "You're afraid of killing," his brother realized. "That's what this is." "I never said that." Kato barked in reply to the accusation, backing away from his brother and closer to the wall his bed leaned against. He shot Mars a dirty glare and pulled his knees forward. "I never said that," he repeated, softer. Mars shook his head, failing to hide his revulsion. "You're going to have to overcome your weaknesses fast, Kato, but in the meantime, I don't know, just break their neck. Make it quick if you have to, but failure is not an option." "I know that. It's not like I have a choice, Mars. Just because I gift you forgiveness does not mean you should expect it of others. Remember that when you're running your mouth," Mars said, coolly. As his brother made his exit, Kato sunk back into the sheets and contemplated what laid in the distance, miles away from Panem, and found his mind drew a blank. Underscore 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 underscore. May, year 69. Kato stalked through the entrance of the annex with deliberate movement. He halted once he found his bounty and amicably greeting the duo. Clove turned away, contemptuous, but Magnilda proudly supplied him with the biggest smile he'd ever seen. The contrast suited them even if it did make him want to laugh. "Hey, Nell," he responded softly, patting her on the head for a brief moment. Magnilda continued to beam at him sweetly. He smiled back at her, before turning directly to Clove. "Why do all of you dumb boys have to spoil her with the pet names?" Cato appreciated that Clove of all people was making the statement. She had a half-dozen nicknames on the tip of her tongue at all times. His response was a simple half-smirk to which she shook her head in frustration. "My instructors said I could come watch you get promoted to potential tribute," Magnilda told him, enthusiastically. Her pigtails bobbed in excitement as she stood on her tiptoes to gather his attention. Each tail was adorned with a loose turquoise ribbon, setting him off. "Don't," he combated a moment later, "I see," as he retracted his arm from her grasp. But Magnilda launched herself towards him again in desperation. "Get lost," Clove commanded her sister immediately, turning back to them. She pushed the petite first year away from them and Magnilda huffed indignantly, storming away. Yep. She was definitely Clove's sister. "You gonna keep your promise?" Cato asked, sounding a bit unsettled. She nodded, but gave him an inquisitive stare in response. The pair began walking towards one of the classrooms, passing several students in the hallway of varying ages along their route. They even ignored a glare from Paxton Watson as they passed her as well. Paxton was surrounded by a number of familiar faces, including the second and third ranked in his cohort, and a number of students in the cohort she and Clove shared. "I never thought you'd be asking me for tips, you know," she remarked, offering him some of her grapes. He accepted a small handful with a breath of relief, opening the door to find a group of third years, who he immediately ordered out of the room. He didn't even count a second and they were gone. Clove set up as Cato rummaged through his bag. She gave a test throw and unsurprisingly the knife hit its mark dead center. Cato whistled appreciatively, "That's why I asked for your help." Clove guided him to the marker and stepped behind him, guiding his arm in the same pattern she'd just used. Then Clove made a throwing movement and he followed suit. His precision was off-center, but better than he'd ever thrown before. Though, by Clove's concerned expression, it wasn't quite good enough. Cato sculled, grabbing another knife, getting a feel for it. It was less ethereal than a sword, less powerful, less critical. In Clove's hands, though, it was anything but. So, he threw again. This time it was closer to the center than his previous attempt. Clove stepped away to observe his technique, calculating. Cato threw another knife, this time nearly perfect. He didn't miss the way her eyes dilated in surprise. He made 10 or so more attempts. Many of his throws fell into the other rings. The rest were close, but not precise. Close, but not enough. Clove made minor corrections to his posture and throwing technique, but despite these efforts he hardly improved. After an hour, Cato was clearly worn but refused to give up. He took a breath and reminded himself, he would prove himself. His efforts would not be in vain. His heart beat for Panem and because of Panem. For his country gave 24 very fortunate youth the opportunity to attain the highest glory and to share that glory with others for the duration of the rest of their life. The capital would not go unappreciated for their generosity and he would play a key into returning to its greatest honor. Another throw followed this affirmation. Clove turned to him with an expression of disbelief in her eyes. She threw herself onto him, causing them to topple onto the mat. "Impressive work," she said softly into his chest. He hesitated for only a moment, before moving a hand through her hair. They both were acutely aware that it was possible he might not be able to replicate the precision again, but it was a start. He began shaking, so Clove grabbed his left hand with her right and gave it a firm, reassuring squeeze. They won't know what hit them. His tears hit the mat. He didn't dare meet her eyes. Underscore 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 underscore. A handful of older students lined their cohort in order of birth date. Felix was at the head of the line, with Nero somewhere within the first 10. Cato counted the gap between himself and Dicey to be 6, with Cato at the heel, naturally. The girls were in a separate, but parallel line to them. One girl searched his eyes for comfort, but he quickly turned away. She would surely fail this exam and he did not want to have to answer to her tears when that happened. He envied Felix for being fortunate enough to go first. He'd be stuck with the turmoil in his stomach for hours to come, while Felix would get to enjoy the show. It was a shitty hand to be dealt, he thought. 4 peacekeepers stood guard by the back entrance. The first criminal was guided to the center of the room. The man was fairly young. So much so, that if he had trained, it was likely that he had only graduated within the last 5 years. He was unshaven, contempt blaring in his eyes. Felix stepped forward. His eyes were deprived of any fleeting thought or feeling, the usual fire suppressed. To the right of him was the holding rack, with a large variety of weapons before him. Some of the items had been regular fixtures of the past year. Others they'd never feasted their eyes on before this moment. It was alluring, and Cato fixated on the array of options available to Felix. Felix examined the weapons very carefully. Finally, he selected a warhammer, grasping the feel of it. "This will do," he informed the lead peacekeeper. Elias Kellogg, age 24, convicted of falsifying reaping documents. Felix's face remained impassive as one of their instructors called out, "Felix Gray, born the 3rd of July, 1956. Reaping eligible." "Begin," confirmed the other instructor as she started a blue and white stopwatch. The cohort watched in anticipation as Felix took his first steps closer to the man. His face lit up with a smirk. Felix lunged forward, striking his victim in the abdomen. The prisoner immediately became winded, holding his stomach, desperately gasping for air. Felix glared at the man before him, and spit, pitiful, before slamming the hammer against the man's left knee. Immediately, the knee came out of place and a few of the students grit their teeth, but none closed their eyes. He swung the hammer to his other arm, turning his stance to one of a baseball player, and aimed for the prisoner's shoulder next. A sickening crack followed the impact and the prisoner cried out desperately in pain. Felix followed up again, hitting towards his other knee. "I've heard of people like you. Trying to remove children from the reaping bowl. How despicable you must be to try and deprive them of their chance for glory." With an expression that unsettled even the strongest among them, Felix leaped upwards, wielding the hammer, then brought it down directly over Elias Kellogg's head. The impact viciously fractured the man's skull, breaking it into several pieces that launched outwards, splattering blood everywhere. "You'll never be able to repay the price for the acts you've committed." Felix seethed, taking a haggard breath with the refractory blood on his face, appearing nearly rabid as an instructor commented with great regard, "We truly look forward to your future, Gray." The other instructor added, "You may sit there and observe your classmates. Very good work, boy." Felix nodded his thanks, breaking the stupor by blinking and steadying his breathing. He seemed to make eye contact with Nero, who must have given him a reassuring look, because Felix's breathing de-escalated. He sat to the left of his cohort mates. Cato noticed him still shaking, trying to regulate himself, and wondered what he could be thinking. The peacekeepers brought other prisoners to collect the bodies after each examination. Soon enough, Cato was focused in on Nero, who looked impassive. Nero studied the middle-aged man before him and selected a long war scythe. Slay Alcott, age 42, convicted of intimacy with a minor under the age of 12. Nero tried to steady himself, apparently caught off guard by crime. He glared at the man with great disdain. In any other scenario, Cato was sure Nero would have given the man quite the hefty lecture. Instead, Nero seemed too fixated on the wall behind Slay Alcott to give any monologues at the moment. Nero H. Kaiser, born the 28th of August, 1956. Reaping eligible. You may begin, the other instructor clucked with a press of her finger. Cato watched her eyes light up a moment later when the man's head was on floor beside her. Satisfied, she kicked the head to the prisoner cleaning up and he placed it on a silver gurney with the rest of Alcott's body. It reminded Cato greatly of the Grim Reaper Victor of 59. Very clean cut, Kaiser. We'll have to work with scythes during the next training year. Thank you, ma'am. He bowed and quietly exited. Next Lady Fox stepped forward and eagerly selected a small, silver spear. Her dark brown locks bounced as she jumped from heel to heel in anticipation as the peacekeeper announced the criminal, a graying man, Jeshupme. Adi interrupted the peacekeeper and sharply informed him. I don't really care who he is or what he's done. He's going to be punished for his crimes either way. The peacekeeper gave her a threatening glance that rolled off of her back. "It's done for your benefit," he explained wearily. "I think I can decide what's for my own benefit," she replied, dismissively, and Cato was sure that if she hadn't been ranked third that this comment would have landed her in some hot water. A.D. Fox, born the 5th of September, 1956. Reaping eligible, the first instructor said, though the last two words were said with an edge of warning in them. The second instructor gestured for her to go, and she obliged her with a grin. A.D. stood curiously before the man, critically examining him before leaping forward. She punctuated with the spear's first impact point. Should she struck again, but this time to the right pectoral. The man's effeminate screams caught the collective off guard, but A.D. only launched forward again. "No, another strike, better, and one to the stomach." Her voice got louder, "By and the grand finale now." The spear went directly into the man's crotch. Cato's throat filled with bile. The boys' line inched away in unison from the female line, and the second instructor only laughed, pointing at them with great amusement. "A bit much, Fox," the first instructor dismissed with disgust. A.D. didn't appear to mind, only grinning to herself as she skipped over to the growing group of observing students. She sat beside Felix, who only managed to give her a rather exasperated expression. She grinned back at him. Cato snorted. A.D. was probably the only person more confident than Felix, and that was saying something. He couldn't wait to watch them suffer mutually at the hands of one another when they were inevitably paired up for candidacy. By the time they got to the November-born students, the second instructor snarled at them. "Have we been wasting our time with you lot? 6 failures in the first 30. We've provided each of you every tool you needed, and this is how you reflect on that." "It's very disappointing," the first instructor agreed, much cooler. Following A.D. Fox's little outburst, the peacekeepers chose to speed up the show and omit the perpetrator's information. Cato didn't much like this. Instead, he was forced to create his own versions of why so many of these men and a few of the women were before them. He found it rather distracting, and this only reinforced his disdain for A.D. Fox. It took several hours for the line to dwindle down to Dicey. Surprisingly, he selected a bowler. Cato wondered when the last time someone had bothered to use a bowler was. The weapon consisted of a 3-pronged durable rope that had small circular weights attached. Traditionally, they were used to capture animals by wrangling them by the foot, but he wasn't too sure how it was supposed to be used on humans. Dicey Wilder, born the 13th of May, 1957. Reaping eligible. Hushed whispers came from the observing crowd as they studied Dicey with growing interest. The auburn-haired boy stared down the young child before him. A small, subdued blond boy with hazel eyes clouded by tears quivered in front of him. Dicey's breathing increased several paces. "Fuck," Cato thought. "Do it, Dicey. Just do it." "You may," their instructor began. "No, wait. I want to know who he," Dicey pointed towards the young boy before him, "is, and why he's here." "Halvar Stallone, age 9, convicted of multiple accounts of thievery. And that's enough to land him here?" Dicey demanded, now looking at the peacekeeper with an intense expression. "Are you sure? Not that it's relevant to you, but his mother refused to pay the fines for his crimes. Said it wasn't worth it," the peacekeeper answered with a resigned expression that was almost treasonous. "Begin, Wilder." Now the second instructor threatened, and Dicey nodded in response. The small boy quickly shut his eyes, heaving to himself. Dicey threw the prongs of the bowler around his neck. The boy's eyes flickered open in confusion, and Dicey pulled harshly. Within a minute, the boy was no longer able to breathe, crumpling to the floor. Dicey removed the weapon from his neck and replaced it on the rack. He looked to the instructors with anticipation, and they chided him for his brashness, but Dicey was given a passing grade. It was all he could really ask for at that point. Cato's stomach lurched. There were very few of them left, 3 girls and 5 boys remained. The line dwindled as one girl was dismissed for her lack of endurance. She had vomited all over the floor, leading to a brief intercession as they cleaned. "Really, Arias? You parents didn't monitor your intake today of all days?" "Go," the first instructor remarked, irked. The girl begged for a second opportunity, but their minds had been made. Lana Romanov walked forward next, selecting an axe as her weapon, and waiting patiently as the second instructor to reset her stopwatch. She quivered, but used the moment to get a hold of herself as the first instructor recited, Lana Romanov, born the 27th of June, 1957. Ineligible for reaping. Her birthday was the same as his, which for a moment made him wonder what else they had in common. He waved off the thought and watched as a worn down, but most likely formerly attractive prisoner was placed before Lana. Romanov was given permission to begin and she did so quickly, directing her attack towards the woman's spleen. The female prisoner screeched as the wound began to gape and Lana flickered with hesitation. Hesitation she ultimately dismissed by throwing the axe into the woman's heart. Her cries stopped, and the instructors appeared mildly impressed by Romanov's work. Maybe they had believed she would fail like he had. If so, what did they think of him? Kato stepped towards them now as they beckoned him forward. He was the very last student to test. The weapons before his eyes were numerous: spears, swords, throwing axes, clubs, flails, scythes, bowlers, bows and arrows, daggers, whips, and many more he was unable to identify. Their racks were a house of horrors, caked in blood and skin tissue. Despite this, he knew exactly what he wanted. He selected a group of small throwing knives and glided his fingers over one of them. Kato Elroy, born the 27th of June, 1957. Ineligible for reaping. The victim brought before him was a woman, just as Lana's had been. His exam subject, however, in contrast, was a heavily pregnant teenage girl. He stepped forward, studying her with great interest. Just as the peacekeepers had said, these criminals were being cleansed of their transgressions in death by helping his cohort get one step closer to attaining honor. On some level, these criminals had to already know that, but Kato couldn't help but to stare at the girl before him. She looked closer to death than anyone he'd ever seen and he hadn't even started yet. Curious. Last, but hopefully not least, the instructor chuckled, waving him off, and he began. Kato tackled the prisoner to the ground. She reflexively struggled against him, so he pinned her down quickly, elbowing her in the face to stall her movements. He plunged the first two knives through the palms of her hands, hitting bone, and holding her into place in the mats below them. She screamed out, struggling to breathe or find clarity, focus, with tears streaming violently down her face. His breath held, but he returned back to his feet, throwing a knife into her stomach. He wondered if she was crying from pain or from grief, but knew it didn't matter. Kato watched her for a moment. She was his first, but would certainly not be the last. Wary, he threw the last knife into her throat and left her to drown in her own blood. Well, well. What a fascinating show this year, the first instructor said to the observing crowd, and pushed Kato towards them. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. His instructors provided no commentary, only gesturing for him to sit with his classmates. Many of your displays were breathtaking. Some of you will make for the greatest tributes yet, the second instructor continued. To think that your cohort went from 97 students this morning to just 71. That's half the number of students that were here when you all began your efforts just a mere 6 years ago. And while it's been a long 6 years, do not forget that you have another 6 to go, the first instructor warned, glaring at the faces of some of the more relaxed students. You are formally dismissed until July 1 St. Kato exhaled, smiling even. He was done. He'd done it. It was over. He was done. Well, until the 1st of July. He beamed at Felix and Nero. Felix gave him a teasing wink and Nero beckoned him over. You did a pretty good job, Kato. I thought for sure you'd use a sword, but you're getting way better with knives. Not as good as you and that scythe, Kato teased, grinning at Nero's flush of embarrassment. Yeah, you're making us all look bad, Felix grinned, grabbing Nero's forearm and dragging it toward him. By the time he turned to find Dicey, he realized the boy had disappeared from sight. That's no good, Kato mused, I never even got to tell him happy birthday. Underscore 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 underscore. May, Hunger Games Year 69. It was quite an unusual day in District 2 West. Earlier that morning it had begun raining, eventually steadying into an inconsistent drizzle that came and went. The rain droplets spilled down the side of their living room window as dark clouds loomed threateningly overhead in the distance. Magnilda's attention was focused on some mindless television special about the capital's best designer fountains. She began to point out the ones she liked best. "This one is so pretty, Lo." Clove shook her head as the Capitolite host gave a rundown of the material makeup of the cast stone fountain in foreground. She rose from her spot on the two-seater couch and returned a moment later with an oversized blue towel, looking towards the entryway. "It's cold outside," Magnilda whined, as if picking up on her thoughts. Her sister briefly looked to her. "Who said you'd come with?" Clove quipped with arched eyebrows, approaching the door with great interest. Twisting the handle, Clove opened it and was engulfed by a breeze. She wrapped the towel around her small frame and clenched it tightly, shivering slightly. It is cold outside, but it was dreadfully boring inside. Why did the Capitol insist on suspending reruns right before the games? One would think that the exhilaration of the years past would only garner more interest for the new games, get them recharged for another run, but of course they choose to torture them with anticipation instead. Magnilda then declared, "When Mr. Mars wins, we'll finally have a victor in the family." "We are not related to Mars," Clove remarked. She pulled on her tennis shoes, lacing them securely, and then gave her younger sister a confused look. She began looking for her house key in the drawer beside the front door. "Well, no. Not yet." Her sister agreed, contemplating to herself, "But after you marry Cato, then we'll all be related." "Right. I'd marry Nero first." Magnilda gasped. "Nero's too old for you, Clove. Nero's our cousin." "Don't be weird." Clove retorted at her sister's eccentric response, dismayed. Shaking her head, she ran out into the falling rain and closed the door behind her. She followed the sidewalk steadily and observed her surroundings with faint interest. Front yards were largely decorated with various rock and cacti. Most of the houses had a recurring color scheme varying between shades of white, tan, and brown, making them only more dull with the rock landscaping. Within 15 minutes' time she had wandered directly into River Mountain Park, a space covered in grass and surrounded by paved walkways. Trees littered the concrete paths, and in the distance one could see mountains faintly covered in fog. Up a small hill was a playground, with tire swings, climbing bars, and pull-up bars. It was all very nice, Clove thought to herself, but it was certainly out of place to the surrounding climate. She took the towel off of her and placed it into her arms, rather haphazardly folding it together. Clove walked along the paved path, relishing in the torrential downpour that took her by surprise. She figured the park had been abandoned for warmer shelter, but Clove couldn't help to think this was the best time of all to be there. The cooler weather and darkened skies were immensely comforting to her, in spite of their ominous appearance. It was then that she saw him. Clove's heart constricted, worry seeping into her bones at the sight of the boy on the ground, unmoving. "Dicey," she called out to him. When he didn't respond, a pit formed in her stomach and she cried out again, desperately, "Dicey." The rain intensified with her in an instant. Clove sprinted towards the catatonic boy, thrust forward with such force that she landed on the unresponsive boy by mistake. "Dicey." His brown eyes opened in surprise, and immediately he pushed her off of him and into a growing muddy puddle a few feet away. The towel flew out of her arms into open air. Dicey sat up, alarmed by the development, stretching his arms, and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. He turned to the now dirty Clove. "Clove," he chastised, alarmed at her appearance. Dicey bounced to his feet and walked over to where Clove had fallen. He extended his arm, and though it appeared she initially planned to rebuff him, she accepted. "Are you all right? I called your name and you didn't move, so I thought something was." "I'm fine," he remarked, plainly. Dicey didn't seem sure she was, though. "Why were you sleeping in the park?" Dicey looked down, his amber eyes fixated on her with reluctance. His resolve wavered. He moved to a drier patch of grass, sitting down once more. She followed, snatching her towel, and he gestured for her to sit beside him. He rubbed his knuckles with his right hand and quietly explained, "I just needed to get away from my house. I got a baby brother and a baby sister." Their names are Callan and Hallie. He's 10, she's 8, and since I was promoted to potential tribute, they've been acting like I'm a hero, but... He trailed off and Clove failed to fill in the gaps, because she wasn't sure where he was going with this. He sounded incredibly disheartened by the whole scenario, but that couldn't possibly be right. "What's wrong, Dicey?" she asked, trying to fathom his grief. "You're ranked so high, you must have had a good kill." "My subject was a little kid. He was like me." "Your subject was a criminal," Clove argued. "All he did is steal food and they made me kill him for it. He was my baby brother's age, and I had to." "I don't understand, Dicey." "His mom wouldn't cover the fines," he said, softly. Dicey began hyperventilating. Clove cringed, gritting her teeth as she watched him struggle to take small breaths, to relax himself. "It could have been my baby brother, Clove. We've been there." She blinked, understanding now, and scrunched her nose in surprise. "You're like, oh, I didn't know." He grabbed handfuls of grass, looking down, looking bitter. "No, not like Kato. His family actually has food. They're food training him for the games. Or, at least they were. You ruined that, though." "I didn't mean to ruin anything," she snapped, responding to the accusation hostilely. "You saved his life, Clove. That trail mix of yours isn't much, but it keeps him going. The orange trees help, too, course, but he's really lucky he met you. I'd give him food if I could, but..." He looked down, trailing off. None of his statements made any sense to her. You can't live without any food at all. His parents have to know that. They expect him to figure it out on his own. That's what survival is about. He's a terrible strategist, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't think he was a decent scavenger." He almost laughed at her look of indignation. His expression softened at the way her wet hair stuck to her face. Clove hung off his every word. "It's different for us, though. My mama, she works real hard at the quarry, but it ain't ever enough with 4 mouths to feed. We want mama to have as much as she can, because it's not easy working down in the quarries. So we find other ways to eat. Callan and Hallie and me, we're a pretty good team." "How do you do it, then?" she challenged, wondering what she would do if it were her and her sister in their place. "Sometimes, I street fight. It's pretty good practice for close combat, actually." Clove thought back to last year's attack. How he dodged the arrows and darts as if they weren't anything at all. Callan is a pickpocket, but he's smart. Hallie's pretty good at making them feel sorry for her, so they always take the bait. He added the last bit with a strange pride, "and we share the winnings." Nero said he used a scythe. "Cut the head clean off." "Right," Dicey remarked, evidently disappointed. "I used a rope thing. It had 3 ropes and small circular weights. I thought it'd be less painful," but he bit his lip, but it was too late to stop the tears springing to his cheeks. "But I think I probably made it worse." Clove took the damp towel and laid it over Dicey. "It'll get easier when you're older, I bet." With a tired expression, he looked to her with disappointment. "You think I'm weak?" She didn't enjoy the expression on his face. It was a face of resignment and defeat. One she refused to acknowledge, because she'd always thought that she was water, always changing course, and Kato was the wind, adopting new information over time. Nero was their steady earth and Felix was most certainly the endless sky, but Dicey, he was their ravenous fire. She reasoned this was why they'd never quite saw eye to eye, because there was a duality in the two and one was destined to quench the other's spirit. "No," she turned away from him, watching the birds seek shelter. "You're strong, Dicey, I know, but you're thinking too much. You have to stop looking at them as being like you. They lost their rights the moment they dishonored Panem. They turned themselves into nothing but a petty criminal, whose last penance is to allow us their bodies as sacrifice. Instructor Malcolm tell you that?" Dicey inquired with a derisive snort, using the towel to dry himself off. "Well, it's the truth, isn't it?" she asked, furrowing her brows. "I don't know," he shrugged. "I think everyone's truth is different. As long as it makes sense to you, I guess that's what matters." She reached forward, wiping away his tears and rubbing his hair dry with the towel just as her mother had when she was younger. She pulled the towel over their heads and whispered, "Don't give up, Dicey." He nodded weakly, and found solace in this intimacy. Underscore 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 underscore. When Clove appeared before him, she was in his face instantly. Why haven't you gone to see Dicey yet? Clove demanded, with a ferocious expression. Dressed in a red t-shirt and denim shorts, she looked rather peculiar to him. Then again, with the sun blazing overhead, anything warmer would have been unthinkable. He'd been sitting on top of a black, heavy-duty park table with a book in his hands. Clove, he blinked in surprise, I didn't know you went to school #76. Why didn't you tell me before? You should eat lunch with us. Well, it's just me and Dicey. Felix and Nero go to the middle school. He pointed to one of the buildings behind them where the 7th and 8th grade students were taught. Clove looked taken aback. She responded in a quiet, but accusatory tone, you knew he wasn't okay. This was not a social call. Everyone handled it in their own way. Dice just didn't, Cato explained, refusing to agree or disagree with her assessment. What does that even mean, Cato? She took a seat in one of the chairs of the table and looked up at him curiously. I thought I was nervous, but you should have seen it. The whole thing was so strange. Felix was acting like he was a peacekeeper or something. I know he's a jerk to you, but Felix isn't normally like that. He's usually more thoughtful than that. You know, because we were only there for them to decide whether we were capable or not. That's all. He thought to himself for a moment, furrowing his eyebrows in an attempt to concentrate. He held his hands together and continued, instead, it was like an experiment gone wrong. Some of the kids weren't able to kill because they weren't strong enough. A lot of them lost it, demanding a reset or threatening the instructors. Other kids purposely drew out their subject's pain, as if to make an impression. We were just there for them to decide whether we were capable or not. Cato trailed off, searching for the answers to an impossible riddle. He continued on, recalling all the details. And Dice kept asking questions. More and more. As if it were going to make any easier for him, but it didn't. It only made it worse. We've only had one choice from the beginning and he knew that, but he lost sight of the prize. He let it get to him. I say let the dead stay dead. They have no right to occupy the minds of the living. Clove moved towards him, pulling him into her chest, wrapping her arms around him. What are you doing, Clove? I'm being a friend. She sounded unsure of herself, which only made him want to laugh. He smiled and returned the hug with just as much force. Thanks, he murmured. I could really use a friend. She retracted her arms and shook her head. Sternly, she grabbed his arm and ordered, you gotta promise me. No matter how bad things get, we've got each other forever. Even though she was asking a lot of him, he didn't waver for even a moment. Cato looked up to her with a fierce expression and agreed, no matter what. Underscore 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 underscore. Magnilda and Cato could not have been any more different from one another, but right now they were irritating her equally as much. Her sister seemed to think she had a monopoly on cuteness and was currently catering it to her advantage. Cato seemed to think he has a monopoly on skill and he was happy to oblige her request for a better view. Clove stood on the tips of her toes to sneak a glance at the 12s, but she couldn't find anyone she recognized. Dicey, Nero, and Felix were somewhere in the crowd and she wondered what it was like to be so close to a potential victor. In a year, she knew that she and Cato would be standing in the crowd at their very own first reaping. The dreadfully bright escort from the capital called out the name of a 14-year-old boy, who moved through the crowd. Clove watched him with keen interest. She doubted that he'd been trained in any capacity, judging by the way he had to fake his confidence. The escort then asked for any volunteers. Immediately, a familiar voice rang. Clove's face lit up with a grin. As Mars made his way to the stage, Cato and Magnilda were both hollering so loudly that Clove wished for the moment that she were anywhere else. Her sister was firmly clutching Kato's neck and he steadied his shoulders to allow her feet some movement. Unlike her, Kato wasn't completely averse to cute things. When they had first met about 5 years ago, he had always called her variations of the adjective. It wasn't until she threatened to poison his trail mix that he put the nickname to rest. In retrospect, Clove felt almost guilty about what she said that day, but as she heard their cheers go up another octave, she rationalized that she didn't feel quite that bad. The escort then pulled the name of an older girl, who resolved herself to move quickly. A moment later a girl Clove didn't recognize volunteered, quickly making her way to the stage. Gathering from her attire, she was most likely from District 2 North. Mars extended his hand for the customary handshake and almost ripped off her arm. The crowd went wild and as they took the tributes away to the Justice Center, Kato pulled Magnilda off his shoulders. In his exhilaration, Kato began to talk quickly and erratically. I've gotta go to Justice Center. Meet in the center in a half hour. He disappeared into the crowd, pushing several people out of the way. Underscore 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 underscore. Several people shouted expletives back at him as he made his way towards the center without regard for his surroundings, but it didn't matter. Kato needed to find his brother now. As soon as he made it to the back of the Justice Center, he sought out a peacekeeper. The peacekeeper directed him to a waiting room, where he found company in his parents, Raiden, a few girls he didn't recognize, and Mars' 2 closest friends. Raiden stood proudly, rubbing a hand through his black hair. He had narrow eyes and sallow skin that were warmed by his smile. When he spotted Kato coming through, he pulled him toward the front, he said, rubbing Kato's shoulder reassuringly. You're going in first, Kato. Livingston and Mason agreed, giving him friendly greeting. He's going to be amazing, Livingston, the taller of Mars' friends said, grinning, throwing his arm into the air. Mason was leaning one arm on Raiden and the other on Livingston and the three of them were smirking like hyenas. A door opened and the peacekeeper beckoned the first of them forward. The guys turned towards the door to see Mars standing there with a grin on his face. You got this in the bag, Mars. Mason called out. Mars laughed at them, a certain light in his eyes, and Raiden pushed Kato into the room encouragingly. Mars closed the door behind him and set Kato onto a chair in the corner. He was smiling from ear to ear as he put his hands onto Kato's shoulders. Kid, when I win, you're gonna come live with me. Kato furrowed his eyebrows with a teasing smirk. Well, yeah. I didn't think I had to be invited. Mars scruffed his hair. Of course not. I call dibs on the master bedroom, and you can have the one next to mine. We'll have to figure out what to do with the rest of them. Maybe transform them into a mini training annex. Mom would lose her mind. Kato grinned in agreement. Mom can do whatever she wants. They're not coming with us, Mars relayed in no-nonsense tone. You're the only one I want. Why not? Me and you, we only need each other. I don't think that's a good idea, Mars. I know I've been a rotten brother the last couple years, but... No. Kato combated, jumping up from the seat. Mars had been many things, but certainly not that. You're the best brother ever. His brother smiled with all of his teeth. You too. And they'll be fine on their own. Mars ruffled his hair again, adding, you care too much about people destined to disappoint you. Kato knew his brother was right, but it seemed almost unthinkable to leave his parents to the quarries. Mars squeezed his hand and Kato demanded, remembering, and we're still going to 2 South next summer. Mars laughed, we'll go anywhere you want. There was a knock on the door a moment later. Mars kissed his forehead and Kato hugged him as tightly as possible. See you soon. Mars nodded with a cocky grin. See you soon, little brother. Underscore 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 underscore. Clove's lungs were ablaze as the dried out trees flew behind her in a daze. Why today of all days had she chosen to stay at home to watch the games? The sun was beating down her neck and the back of her feet were surely bleeding by now. On a normal day, this would have all been prevented. Today was not a normal day. She hooked a left at Mesquite and continued to run as fast as she possibly could. It had all happened so fast, and then so agonizingly slow. Clove squealed when a rock pierced the sole of her shoe, but only allowed herself a moment before taking off just as quickly as before. When she arrived at her first destination, she slipped over another rock and onto the front porch of the Wilder residence. She hated rocks. Clove snatched a note addressed to her off of the front door and quickly scanned for necessary details. Clove, Pecan and Superstition Drive. 8400